When he was about to leave, someone calls out to him from behind. It's the team leader of the development team and his ex-girlfriend. They had been together for 7 years. They were happy during that time. He was naturally lazy and she was a born workaholic. And for some reason, even though everything seemed fine, she suddenly dumped him. 6 months after the breakup, she already had someone new by her side. He asks how her new relationship is going, and she tells him it's going well. It doesn't feel good hearing that from her, but regardless, he wishes her well. She tells him to stop being petty and continue working. While looking at the screen, he asks if the character he was fixing was actually a boss, since he was killed so easily. She tells him that as more scenarios pass, the character grows stronger. The difficulty depends on the player's choices. Then she asks if he knew the character was modeled after him. He looks at her, confused. She giggles and asks if he didn't notice the similarities between them. She adds that it was the reason she killed the character as soon as she met him in game. She even mentions that his personality was similar to that character's. While they're talking, he notices something outside. He asks if her new boyfriend isn't out there waiting for her. He tells her not to keep him waiting and to go to him. She says she will and leaves with a wave. After thinking for a few minutes, he decides to test the new character changes one more time. It feels harsh knowing the villainous character was modeled after him. As a child, Duin was called a magical genius and placed on a pedestal. But in reality, he was just an average mage. And because of his arrogance and noble background, he ended up with the worst personality. He could grow stronger, but he was always surrounded by people who hated him. Woojin wonders if he should add more attributes or personality traits to make the character a little stronger, especially now that he knows the character was based on him. He adds comprehension, wealthy, mightiest touch, sharp eyes, Iron Man. In the end, he adds everything that looks good. Feeling slightly ashamed, he quickly decides to revert the changes. Just then, a notification pops up on his phone. It's the storyteller asking if Woojin needs anything changed in the models and telling him to adjust it himself if necessary. Woojin says he was just looking at the model. The storyteller laughs and tells him to look outside the window. When he does, he sees a circular cloud swirling in the sky, lightning crackling all around it. A bolt of lightning strikes. His mind goes blank. When he regains consciousness, he wonders where he is. He hears a man warning someone about Decalane, saying that Decalane is no tame man. Even if he seems hesitant, he always has something else up his sleeve. Decalane is only downplaying his own talents. He is a vile villain, the man says. Then he hears a woman shouting Decalane's name. When he opens his eyes, the girl beside him asks if he plans to stay cooped up in his room forever just because of some woman. She demands to know if he's trying to bring shame to the entire family. She throws the papers she's carrying onto the ground and tells him to get off his ass if he doesn't want to be fired. After that strange sky appeared outside his window, he woke up in this body, in this strange place. And it has already been a week since then. He is inside the world he once developed. The scenery feels familiar, and he is the worst character in the game, the one who cannot escape death no matter what, the man fated to die, the villain Dulane. He gathers the papers his half-sister threw on the floor, their research documents. The woman who threw them is Uriel. They don't have a good relationship, and the woman his sister mentioned earlier was probably Julie. He assumes Decalane had some kind of issue with his fiancée, Julia. His sister told him to get up if he didn't want to be fired from this prestigious professor position. So he decides to go to the lecture, even though he has never given one before. He gets out of bed and heads to the bathroom to prepare. That's when he realizes he possesses all the attributes he gave Duin before possessing him. His bathroom looks more like a luxurious swimming pool. Although the environment and clothing feel foreign, he uses them naturally, as if he has lived as Decalane his entire life. Normally, he would feel uncomfortable wearing anything other than office attire. But here, he feels elegant, comfortable. It's as if his body is telling him this is his body now. The formalities that once felt rigid as Woojin now feel natural. He is a noble. He feels like a superior member of the nobility. But Woojin is just a regular man, objectively tall and handsome. And to quote his ex-girlfriend, a pathetic, lazy bastard. He tells himself he won't lose his identity to this power trip. He walks toward the car, a driver already waiting for him. He has never been inside such a luxurious car before. The thought of how expensive it must be brings back memories that irritate him. Then he notices someone sitting beside him and wonders who it is. The boy next to him greets him and hands over some papers. He wonders if the kid is an assistant or a secretary and asks if he is a wizard. The boy replies that he has been in Decalane's service for 3 years already. Woojin assumes the document is lecture material, but it's actually a full script for him to read, containing everything needed for the lecture from start to finish. Woojin tells the boy he did a good job. The boy looks shocked. When Woojin tells him to rest until they arrive at the university, even the driver seems surprised that he gave someone a compliment. Woojin himself feels uncomfortable after praising another person. He wonders if it's Decalane's true nature resisting from within. They reach the university, an eye-catching building with marvelous architecture. He remembers the letter stating that he had to go to Roto Hall. The students are murmuring about how fortunate they are to finally attend his lecture. They say they heard he was a master of spell interpretation, apparently a child prodigy. He gets everyone's attention and introduces himself before starting the lecture. Some of the girls already fall for him, whispering about how handsome, smart, and cool he is. One student wonders how that is cool. She declares him the enemy of her father. 3 years ago, her father ended his life. He had devoted himself to researching spell interpretation, but after someone extorted his thesis from him, the shock drove him into despair and he chose death. The person who stole that thesis was Decluin. However, she could do nothing since she lost everything after her father passed away. Though she was born a noble, she lost everything of value, including her family home and their territory. She became an orphan with nowhere to go. Back then, she pledged to take revenge on the man responsible. After that, she worked relentlessly to enter the Royal University where Decluin was a professor. Even if the other students don't know, she does. The spell interpretation everyone praises him for is a bluff built on her father's achievements. She wonders how he can stand before her so arrogantly after ruining her family. She says his position should have belonged to her father. She swears to expose him and have him killed. For now, she restrains herself, waiting for the perfect opportunity. Decluin silences the class and announces that he will be teaching a special lecture. He begins by explaining the 3 attributes and the 9 types of magic. As he teaches, he thinks this is easier than he expected. Even though it is his first lecture and he is unfamiliar with magic theory, he understands everything perfectly. One of the attributes Wu Jin gave Duin before possessing him makes all the students focus naturally, without feeling pressured. He tells the students that while hard work is important, without talent they must choose carefully and focus. Wu Jin thinks that line suits Decluin well. He himself is not talented. His current mana at its peak is 3,300. There are named mages with over 30,000 mana, and Wu Jin finds it impressive how Decluin used to accomplish things he should have taken notes on himself. He ends the lecture and hesitates before reading the final line of the script, since the original Decluin would never have said it. But he says it anyway. He asks if anyone has questions. No one raises a hand. Wu Jin feels relieved. Then someone calls his name. She says a mysterious spell was discovered in the dormitories the previous night. People assume it to be the work of a devil. She asks Decluin to interpret it, since he is the so-called genius interpreter. Decluin stops her and asks if she is truly from this university. She is confused by the question. He explains that it should be second nature to introduce oneself and state one's affiliation before asking a question. He says he will not answer someone who ignores basic etiquette. In truth, he refuses because using his comprehension skill would consume an enormous amount of mana. The other students laugh at her, assuming she only wanted attention. As he is about to leave, she stops him again. She says the magic tower is refusing to analyze the mysterious spell and that she is the only one who can bring it forward. Without waiting for permission, she draws the spell and asks him to interpret it. He nearly exhausts all his mana. She says several debutantes in the dorms have been analyzing it with no progress and asks if he can at least give a hint. Before she finishes, he tells her it is barrier magic. There is no need for hints. He explains it is a bewitchment-type barrier spell likely used to trap students. She is left speechless. Later, in the cafeteria, she calls him an annoying bastard. She had planned to expose his interpretation skills as a lie using an unknown spell, but instead she was made to look like an ill-mannered fool simply because she failed to state her name. She believes he lied about the spell type. Bewitchment magic is extremely difficult. She only brought the spell drawn in the dorms because she thought it was meant to enhance freshman research skills. She calls Decluin an idiot for exposing himself. One of her friends runs over, calling her name repeatedly. Her friend says that after they assumed it was a barrier and recomposed the spell, Decluin's interpretation turned out to be correct. She asks what she means. Her friend says she was brave to question the professor, but Ephraim cuts her off and asks about the barrier. Her friend asks if Decluin wasn't incredible to interpret it so quickly without any parameters at all. She cannot believe it. Her friend thanks her and leaves to write a report. She convinces herself he was just lucky. She feels irritated for improving Decluin's reputation for nothing. She pulls out a paper outlining Decluin's course teachings. As the saying goes, know your enemy and you'll win all your battles. She says she will not waver, even if she has to see his annoying face every day from now on. She promises to expose him no matter what. While walking back, Wu Jin thinks the situation could have ended badly. The moment he looked at the spell, his skill activated automatically. Just glancing at it drained nearly all his mana. He still could not fully understand it. Even if he had twice his current mana, it would not have been enough. Still, he is relieved nothing went wrong. He is pulled from his thoughts by someone standing in front of him. She asks if he has been well. It is Decluin's fiancé, someone destined to reach the pinnacle of knighthood. He tells her he has been fine. She asks how he can be fine after breaking the promise they made a week ago. Wu Jin has no memory of any promise. He says he does not recall it and tries to walk past her. She steps into his path and asks if he is running away again just like before. Realizing he cannot avoid her, he says he had a fever that caused him to forget certain things and asks if she could remind him of the promise. She had asked him to promise that he would be honest about himself, to confess his pretenses and arrogance to everyone if he truly wished to be with her, but she tells him nothing. Instead, she says she was wrong to trust him and steps aside. He glances back at her then leaves now that he is dismissed. She grits her teeth as she walks away. Their engagement was one of convenience. Decluin, a talented mage, and Julie, a gifted knight. With their union, her brother believed only prosperity would follow, both politically and through their bloodlines. No one could object to her brother's decision. It was acceptable. She believed it was for the good of her household even if she did not like him. However, the household soon realized that his talents never truly existed. He had lied his way into his position as a professor. After a certain incident, he stopped producing results. Even so, both families tried to keep it quiet, perhaps because they did not want to become the subject of gossip. They did not want the public to think they had made the wrong decision, but she could not endure it. She was willing to accept the marriage but not the lies. That was her conviction as a knight. That was when she made him promise and he agreed to do as she asked. She had been surprised by his agreement, but now she believes he never intended to keep that promise in the first place. While walking around the university, he pauses to admire how beautiful it looks. The campus is vast, and the gardens are carefully maintained. He and his team had spent countless sleepless nights creating this atmosphere. He thinks it might have been better if he had possessed someone else instead of Decluin. Just then, he notices someone running straight toward him. He instinctively pulls his elbow back to defend himself, but it is only his assistant, who falls after being struck and quickly apologizes, saying he was in a hurry to see his professor. Decluin asks if his name is Zoro. The boy replies that his name is Alan. Decluin says he must have been mistaken. Inside his office, he asks why Alan was in such a rush to see him. Alan explains that it concerns the list of sponsorships for the new mages this year. As Woojin scans the names, he notices that several of them are glowing gold. He assumes it is because of the attributes he added earlier. He figures the glowing names represent people who could bring him money. Among them all, the girl who declared him her enemy, Ephraim Luna, shines the brightest. However, she has no sponsors. Decluin asks Alan why no one is backing her. Alan suggests that people may be too afraid to sponsor her, worried they would end up on Decluin's bad side. But she was talented enough to enter the university without attending an academy. If he allows things to continue as they are, he will meet the same fate Decluin was destined for. Decluin had countless deaths in the game: a sword through the heart, a wand to the head, poison in a glass of wine, a bomb on a train. Woojin has no intention of dying, so he must make a different choice than Decluin would have. He signs the paper and tells Alan to submit it. After Alan leaves, Woojin realizes he will need a great deal of money to survive. Investing in a mage is one method, but it will not be enough. There are countless people in this world who resent Decluin. People who would try to kill him the moment they get the chance. To survive, he needs an escape route, a way to grow stronger. With Decluin's natural lack of talent, he would not be able to respond properly to the dangers ahead. But he possesses something the original Decluin never had: his unique attributes. Decluin once bragged about mastering all 4 elements, but in truth, he could not control them properly. Still, he can combine what he has with his new attributes, especially metal manipulation. This allows him to wield levitating blades, a technique unfamiliar in this world. It is not mainstream magic, but it is powerful. What he lacks in natural talent, he can compensate for by manipulating the properties of metal. But before reaching that level, he must learn the basics. So he begins immediately. The moment he starts, the room fills with a cool blue glow. He is learning telekinesis rapidly. Within moments, he makes a pen float effortlessly. Because he has fully memorized the spell, he does not need a chant or incantation. He can cast it with pure will, but this is only a low-tier technique. Even high-level telekinesis will not take him where he wants to go. As he flips through a magic book, a strange idea forms in his mind. What if he engraved magic circles not only in his mind, but throughout his entire body? The larger the circle, the stronger the effect. If he fully understands his own body, he would not be limited to placing one in his brain. He could carve one into his heart, another into his core, dozens across his body. The risks are obvious: overload, internal damage, possibly even death. But one of the attributes he added is called Iron Man. It allows his body to endure the severe side effects of extreme magical strain. Using the last of his mana, he prepares to test the theory on himself. The moment it begins, he understands why no one has ever dared attempt it. A horrifying pain tears through him, as if every bone is being crushed and every muscle ripped apart. Yet he does not groan, he does not scream, he endures it with the composure of a noble. When it is finally over, his mana is completely depleted. His body is on the verge of collapse, but he has succeeded. A single magic circle had been engraved into his shoulder. At that rate, it would take about 2 weeks to cover his entire body. A month after his first seminar, the day of his first official lecture arrived. The students were confused. They had heard all kinds of rumors about Decluin from their upperclassmen, but this class was nothing like they expected. Instead of giving a lecture, Decluin simply left them a message. Bring me anything from the surrounding area that is overflowing with elemental energy. And just like that, the students were wandering through the forest, searching for something to present. Ephraim was not surprised. She expected this kind of irresponsibility from him. Of course, he would leave the students to figure things out themselves on the first day. As she searched, someone bumped into her from behind. She turned, ready to snap, but froze when she saw who it was. Sylvia, a name she had not heard in years, one of her childhood friends, or at least she used to be. Ephraim wondered if Sylvia even recognized her. Later, while building her elemental construct, Ephraim's thoughts drifted back. 10 years ago, Sylvia's family had surrounded her manor with soldiers. They were afraid of Ephraim and her father's potential. So they pressured them, threatened them, and forced her to abandon magic altogether. Her fists clenched as the memories resurfaced. Then suddenly, the elemental form she was working on vanished, as if the mana had been completely drained. She followed the flow and found Sylvia gathering mana to construct her own element. Ephraim confronted her, asking if she realized she had stolen everything she had just gathered. Sylvia said nothing. That silence only made her angrier. She accused Sylvia of pretending not to recognize her, of acting innocent after threatening her family and driving her away from magic. She demanded to know if Sylvia had been so afraid of losing her spotlight that she crushed someone else's future. Finally, Sylvia spoke. She claimed she did not know Ephraim. That was the last straw. Ephraim asked if Sylvia was looking down on her, mocking her. Sylvia calmly replied that she had heard about Ephraim's father, the once noble man who was now dead. That sentence shattered something inside her. Blinded by rage, she snapped. To everyone's shock, she struck Sylvia, yelling at her to say it again. Sylvia quickly tried to form a barrier to defend herself. A massive explosion followed, and the other students were startled by the sudden blast. Sylvia lay on the ground while Ephraim grabbed her by the hair, demanding she repeat herself one more time. Then she noticed something strange behind her. An unstable purple orb, like a void, formed where their mana had collided with the element Sylvia was constructing. The void began sucking in everything around it. The students panicked and tried to run as it swelled, ready to explode. Ephraim knew that if it detonated, metal fragments would scatter everywhere and kill everyone nearby. It exploded. Ephraim tried to raise a barrier to protect herself, but nothing happened. The fragments were floating in front of Decluin. They began moving again, then flew toward him and dissolved into mana. The moment he used telekinesis, gasps echoed all around. As students of magic, they could not help but feel the beauty of it, enchantment magic so refined and dazzling that it commanded silent admiration. After extracting all the mana from the fragments, he gathered the debris into a pile and announced that the lecture would end there. He ordered everyone except those who caused the disturbance to leave immediately. Ephraim knew she was finished. He brought both of them to the interrogation room. One professor who had arrived late immediately began flattering him and the chairwoman. The chairwoman welcomed them and apologized for the sudden summons. Professor Ran, who had been flattering them moments earlier, demanded to know who dared lay hands on a member of a higher noble family. He claimed he heard it was a lowly commoner who had not even attended an academy. He praised Decluin in nearly every sentence, remarking how impressive it was that he resolved the situation before it escalated further. Wu Jin realized the old man was trying to curry favor, but it was only natural for them to side with an influential noble family rather than a fallen nobody. He decided it would be best to alter the outcome of the disciplinary meeting. From the moment he arrived, he sensed a scarlet energy radiating from Ephraim. It seemed only he could perceive it, like a warning that his death was drawing closer. The disciplinary hearing between Sylvia and Ephraim began. Immediately, the old professor began berating Ephraim, saying she could have seriously injured many students if Decluin had not intervened. He demanded to know the reason for the conflict. She replied that she could not answer. She knew Decluin was behind the glass and did not want him to learn about her father. Sylvia had insulted him, and she could not allow her enemy to know how deeply that hurt. The old professor asked if she was joking, suggesting it was some kind of inferiority complex. He said she should have remembered the difference in status between herself and Sylvia. Then he asked Sylvia to speak. Sylvia calmly explained that she had accidentally destroyed Ephraim's work, which led to an argument. After hearing her explanation, the professors began siding with her. Some even suggested expelling Ephraim because of her violent behavior. As the harsh words piled on, Ephraim felt a chill spread through her. All the scolding, all the accusations, and no one to defend her. She blamed everything on Decluin. The chairwoman finally stated that the general opinion seemed to be settled. She turned to Decluin and asked for his thoughts before they reached a final decision. Decluin began by stating that he was speaking as the head professor of the Magic Tower and a member of the disciplinary committee. At that moment, Ephraim was certain she would be expelled. He continued and asked whether she believed she held no fault in the incident, but instead of directing the question at Ephraim, he pointed it at Sylvia, catching them both off guard. Even the old professor looked stunned. Decluin noted that Sylvia could have easily prevented the incident, yet made no effort to do so. He asked whether the abilities everyone held in such high regard were not enough to stop it. Sylvia admitted it and apologized, saying she did not block Ephraim's attack because she wanted her to fall into greater trouble. Ephraim could not understand why he questioned Sylvia instead of her, even though she had been the one who struck first. The old professor raised the same point, insisting the attacker was at fault. Decluin responded that if they wished to argue context, then it was his fault for designing the lecture that led to this situation. He asked the old professor whether he wanted him to take the blame instead. The professor quickly denied it. Ephraim wondered why Decluin would go so far as to refute a professor who was clearly siding with Sylvia just to defend her. The chairwoman finally intervened and said that was enough. Children are bound to clash as they grow, she remarked. Since they were both freshmen, it would be best to let the matter go this once. Ephraim clenched her fist. The Decluin she knew would never have acted this way. The moment he began speaking earlier, she had already prepared herself for expulsion. The old professor resumed flattering Decluin, praising how extraordinarily he had analyzed the events for the sake of the students. Just then, Ephraim called out to him and said she had a question. She asked whether he remembered the surname Luna, whether he remembered her father, and whether he knew that her father had suffered his entire life under Decluin before taking his own life. Decluin had expected her to question him. Ephraim could not stop herself from asking if he remembered her father and the way he died. But if he did remember, would he overturn the verdict just to protect himself? And if he did not remember at all, would that not be even worse? Decluin replied that there was no need to ask. He told her not to waste her potential on the past. She confirmed it in her heart. Decluin did remember her father. He had protected her out of some sense of responsibility, but was it pity? She could not tell. Still, she felt a strange satisfaction knowing he had not forgotten her. Not yet. Later in the carriage, Sylvia's father asked what had happened. He told her she no longer needed to worry about Ephraim. Ephraim had missed her window to refine her talent, he said, and would never be able to match Sylvia now. 10 years ago, on the day of the Academy's aptitude exam, Sylvia first met Ephraim. The priest declared that both of them possessed the talent to become archmages. Two children from the same generation who could one day reach the pinnacle of the magic world, a realm even the emperor could not interfere with. Among the 3 seats at that pinnacle, the first belonged to Archmage de Marcin. 2 seats remained vacant at the time, but one was likely already reserved for Adeline, the university's chairwoman. That meant Sylvia would have to compete with Ephraim for the final seat. She understood all of this without her father having to explain it. Her father had pressured Ephraim's father into abandoning her enrollment at the academy. Sylvia knew it was done entirely for her sake, to ensure a smooth path toward becoming an archmage. It was both her wish and her fate. When she remembered Ephraim asking whether she was afraid of her catching up, Sylvia concluded that Ephraim had simply been unlucky. Her father then warned her that she should be more concerned about Decluin than about that Luna girl. Decluin was not a simple man. Even if he appeared stagnant now, he had once been called a genius in his youth. He could rise again without warning. Sylvia already understood that. He had seen through her trap. She had intentionally drawn Ephraim's mana. She had arranged the construct to explode upon contact with it. The larger the incident, the deeper the trouble Ephraim would fall into. Yet Decluin saw through the scheme instantly, even though she had been careful to ensure no one was watching. And instead of exposing her, he chose compromise. In essence, he was telling her, "I know everything, so cooperate with me." She had once thought he was merely an arrogant man with slightly above-average talent, but now she wondered if she had picked a fight with the wrong person. A few days later, at Decluin's manor, he prepared to attend a social event. As his carriage rolled forward, he reflected that supporting Ephraim had been the right choice, since he no longer felt the presence of death creeping toward him. He had not known she was that Ephraim when she questioned him in class, yet he quickly realized she likely harbored hostility toward him. Even then, he understood that Sylvia might now hold a grudge as well, but he had no alternative. It had been a matter of escaping certain death. He would have preferred to avoid gatherings like this, yet there was much to gain from attending, so he endured it. While there, he decided he would observe some of the major figures. Upon arrival, the servants welcomed him. The hall was filled with nobles, many of whom he recognized. One in particular stood out, Ehelm, the very character Wu Jin had once modeled himself after. As he considered Ehelm, an elderly noble approached to greet him. Soon, once word spread that Decluin had arrived, the surrounding nobles rushed over, eager to speak with him. Amid the noise, he caught a familiar name. Without hesitation, he brushed past the crowd toward the one who had mentioned it, Ganesha. Becoming acquainted with her, a woman destined to be a turning point among the adventurers, would be the greatest gain he could achieve tonight. He moved through the party searching for her, unaware that she was already observing him from the balcony above. Wary, he sensed her gaze and looked up, spotting the woman with red pigtails dressed in adventurer's attire. As he made his way toward her, someone called out to him, "Ehelm." He approached Decluin with a faint smile, asking how his research was progressing, mentioning the rumors that it had stagnated for over 3 years and how people were beginning to doubt his abilities. Decluin recognized the thinly veiled taunt. They had once been peers at the university, even close. But after losing the head professor position to Decluin, Ehelm had nurtured quiet jealousy. Perhaps the original Decluin would have taken the bait, but such provocations meant nothing to Wu Jin. When Decluin glanced back toward the balcony, Ganesha was gone. Ehelm added that no one would like Decluin if he continued acting so high and mighty. Annoyed that he had lost sight of Ganesha because of him, Decluin stepped closer and told him to cut it out, calling him a rotten, cheese-like bastard before turning away. He left quickly to search for Ganesha again, yet everywhere he went, nobles tried to flatter him, wasting more of his time. Eventually, he stepped outside for fresh air. To his surprise, Ganesha was standing beside him. She asked if he had been looking for her. He replied that he had only stepped out to escape the leeches, though since she approached him first, he wondered if they were already acquainted. He added that he had simply been lost. Ganesha laughed and said she knew he had been searching for her. She apologized for failing the mission he had assigned, explaining that the advance payment had been fully returned along with the cancellation fee, and asked him to let it go just this once. She said she was sorry she could not bring him the child talented in magic that he had requested. She had grown attached and could not hand them over. Decluin had intended to adopt a gifted child to compensate for his own shortcomings. Ganesha then asked if she could pose a question. He asked what she meant. She asked how long he planned to continue living as he had been. Before Wu Jin possessed Decluin's body, he had accepted empty praise from those who offered no real support. He destroyed the trust of those around him and hurt many in pursuit of fame, but Wu Jin's only goal was survival. He told her he would live differently. Ganesha blinked, clearly surprised. She leaned closer and admitted she had not expected that answer. She thought he might attempt to kill her after she accepted the mission and then fled. He responded that she was worrying excessively for no reason. Wu Jin knew very well that trying to kill Ganesha would likely cost him his life. Though she did not appear imposing, she was among the strongest adventurers alive, possessing an invincible body and mastery of countless martial arts. A fighter who had reached the physical peak. And with Wu Jin now in control, Decluin had neither the time nor the intent to send assassins after her. Ganesha wondered aloud whether he had eaten something strange. Having achieved what he came for, he told her he would be returning and that she need not worry. She asked if he was truly leaving and whether it was really fine, whether there would truly be no assassinations, no deaths. He turned back and said such things were classless. She fell silent. With his sister's influence, he could always use the Adventurers Guild to pressure Ganesha in the future if necessary. Elsewhere in the hall, one of Julie's relatives asked how long she planned to remain at the event. Julie replied that she had not wanted to attend in the first place. The relative tried to coax her away from the dining table, but Julie refused to move. Then she asked how things were going with Decluin. Julie asked what she meant, and the relative said she was worried because there had been so many rumors. Julie's expression darkened as she recalled that day. She said it was obvious things were not going well. The relative urged her to lower her voice. At that moment, Julie noticed Decluin descending the stairs. He ignored her completely and walked straight toward the exit. The guests were stunned. Decluin, who once loved social gatherings, was leaving early, without even sparing a glance at his fiancée. Rumors soon began spreading that his early departure was due to discord with Julie. Of course, Wu Jin had no way of knowing any of that. A week passed after the event, and during that time, aside from his daily magic training, he began working out as well. The reason was simple: he had nearly died attempting something reckless. A few days earlier, he had tried to construct another magic circle. Had he been an ordinary person, he would have died without question. He survived only because of the Iron Man attribute. After meeting Ganesha, his desire for greater strength intensified. So he engraved fire control on top of his existing engravement to further enhance his metal manipulation. This method drastically reduced the time required to learn magic, but in exchange, it was extremely dangerous. After experiencing the strain on his body firsthand, he resolved to strengthen himself physically and even created a strict morning routine. Once training was done, he headed to work. At his office, Alan presented him with an official notice from the Magic Tower. An audit hearing had been scheduled in 6 months to review his research advancements, and he was instructed to prepare all relevant documents before then. For Wu Jin, it was a disastrous situation. Decluin's research had been stagnant for over 3 years. Losing his professorship with all its privileges would be no different from losing his only hope of ever returning to Earth. He needed to find something in Decluin's laboratory and quickly. He entered with hope, but the moment he opened the door, he froze. The room was a complete mess, as if untouched for years. One particular heap of trash looked deliberately out of place. He did not know who had done it, but they clearly understood that the former Decluin would never bother entering again after seeing such chaos. Fortunately, Wu Jin had telekinesis. As he cleaned the room, he discovered a research journal buried beneath the debris. It was encrypted to prevent anyone from stealing its contents. That precaution was meaningless to him. His attributes allowed him to comprehend anything. The book emitted a brilliant golden glow, a sign that the research inside was extraordinarily valuable. As he read through it, he realized it was genius, yet incomplete. Pages were torn out, certain sections were blank, some logical steps were flawed. Even so, its brilliance was undeniable. Inside, he found a bookmark, a childhood photo of Ephraim. It appeared her father had tried to hide this research from Decluin. The resentment of the Luna family toward him was unmistakable. Because of Decluin, Ephraim had endured a brutal life. He closed the journal and quietly declared that he would complete the research, and if he succeeded, he would add Luna's father as co-author. Of course, Decluin would remain the primary author. He needed that title to keep his professorship. Meanwhile, at a cafe, one of the girls suggested that all the commoners should stick together since there were only 30 of them in the university. She asked for Ephraim's opinion. Ephraim was caught off guard. She had once been a noble herself. But with no land or residence left, she was no different from a commoner now. The girl insisted that Ephraim should stand with them no matter what. Others chimed in, saying she should become the representative of all commoners, especially since she had also suffered because of Sylvia. One of the boys pointed out that forming a club would require approval from a supervising professor, and doubted any professor would grant it to them. They began listing names. "What about Professor Rian?" one asked. "Impossible," someone replied. "He always fawns over nobles." Professor Carmel would turn away the moment she saw commoners, and Decluin would never help them, another added. Ephraim, meanwhile, was quietly hoping no one would eat the last slice of cake so she could have it later. Suddenly, her friend jumped up and suggested she try asking Decluin before Ephraim even had a chance to refuse. Others agreed, saying he seemed more impartial than the rest. He looked down on both nobles and commoners equally without discrimination. The girl added that Ephraim had avoided expulsion thanks to him, and perhaps she had caught his interest. Ephraim quickly denied it, insisting it was nothing like that and that he was not some admirable person. She did not want to be involved in this at all. She tried to slip away, but when her friend grabbed her arm, she suddenly noticed someone standing behind her. Decluin, in a cold voice, he told them to move aside. She froze in surprise. Julia instantly teleported behind the door and whispered good luck to Ephraim. Ephraim muttered that Julia was a coward. Decluin walked past her, but she hurriedly stepped forward, blocking him. With a deep bow, she presented the document and asked him to sign it so they could establish the club. She promised they would not trouble him, explaining that none of the other professors were willing to approve a club for commoners. Decluin took the document, signed it without hesitation, and told her to submit the club details to his office later. Then he handed it back. She stared at the signature in disbelief. Julia burst out from hiding, cheering and hugging Ephraim, declaring she had always known she could do it. Later, during class, Ephraim wondered whether Decluin had helped her out of guilt or pity. After all, he had driven her father to his death. Whatever kindness he showed now felt hollow. If he truly regretted what he had done, she thought, then he should reveal the truth and repent properly. Julia noticed Ephraim trembling and asked if she was all right, telling her not to pay attention to people who had nothing better to do than gossip. Ephraim was confused until she followed Julia's gaze. Sylvia and a group of noble girls were whispering, calling her disgusting. In that moment, Ephraim understood. She had made herself the common enemy of the nobles. Even so, she said it was fine and told Julia to focus on the lecture. She remembered hearing that Decluin's classes were supposed to be different. He did not disappoint. From seemingly nowhere, he produced a book and announced that today's topic would be flowing fire. His previous lectures had been arrogant displays of power, but this time, it was different. Beautiful demonstrations, creative explanations, an elite level of understanding woven into every word. The entire class was stunned. Even Sylvia, who had long since lost the joy of learning because of her natural talent, found herself captivated. Decluin combined parameters typically used in water magic with fire magic, demonstrating how flowing fire functioned. It left the classroom in awe. Sylvia could hardly believe it. She had not expected such depth. Most mages relied on intuition when casting spells. Magical theory was like a mold, follow it too strictly and everyone would produce the same result. That was the paradox. To become elite, you needed intuition, but intuition could not be fully explained. For someone branded a fraudulent genius to teach such a complex, theory-heavy lesson was almost unthinkable. After class, students admitted the rumors had been wrong. His lectures were nothing like they expected. Even Sylvia had to admit she had never been so focused before. But when Ephraim returned to her room, her mood darkened at the sight of graffiti scrawled across her door. Then she noticed a letter slipped underneath it. It was a sponsorship certificate. She assumed it was a prank. Who would sponsor someone hated by both Sylvia's family and Decluin? Still, she thought she could report the fake document and perhaps receive a reward. When she visited the administration office, however, she was told the sponsorship was real. She froze in disbelief. Overcome with excitement, she slapped and pinched herself to make sure she was not dreaming. Then she quickly looked around to see if anyone had noticed her reaction. When she saw the amount, 100,000 elni, panic set in. She hurried back and packed an emergency suitcase just in case. Regret crept in. She should not have gone to the office. The staff member had given her a strange look. What if someone targeted her for the money? I should have been more careful, she muttered, accidentally banging her head against the desk. It hurt, but she did not wake up. Tears filled her eyes. Someone had finally acknowledged her talent. She felt grateful that there were still kind people in the world. Wiping her tears, she steadied herself and resolved to work even harder from now on. Meanwhile, at her manor, Decluin's sister, Yukline, received word that he had gone to an auction. She ruffled her hair in frustration, recalling how the last time he attended one, he spent 10 million elm. If he caused trouble again, she would not forgive him. At the auction house, Wu Jin was thrilled. He could finally purchase what he needed. During his telekinesis training, he realized he required metal to compensate for his lack of mastery. His current item, made of wood steel, was only a temporary solution. What he truly needed would be available here. He entered the VVVIP waiting room and immediately spotted Julie. She noticed him just as quickly and rose from her seat to face him. With a cold expression, she said she hoped he had been well. Wu Jin was not particularly pleased to see her. She mentioned hearing that he had sent 2 young mages to the disciplinary committee. He replied that it was old news and asked if she intended to blame that on him as well. After a brief pause, she said they had been newly debuted mages and asked whether he meant to crush the dreams of rookies with despair. She warned him that his sins would return to haunt him one day and urged him to change. This, she said, was the last advice she would ever offer him. Wu Jin realized Julie intended to sever her relationship with Decluin completely. That suited him fine. No matter how beautiful she was, he had no intention of marrying someone so unstable. Around her were too many variables, too many paths that led to his death. He might even die on the wedding day. He simply nodded. She turned and walked away. Then he remembered Julie was not the type to attend auctions. He asked if she had come all this way just to say that. She spun back around, stunned, and immediately snapped at him, accusing him of being full of himself. There was no way she would come for his sake. She insisted she had business of her own and would never attend because of Decluin. Wu Jin told her he understood and asked her to calm down, saying it once was enough. She puffed her cheeks in irritation before leaving. For a brief moment, he found her unexpectedly cute. And then it hit him. Why had his emotions shifted so suddenly? Just seconds ago, he had been calculating how dangerous it was to be near her. Was he being influenced by Decluin's lingering emotions, despite his efforts to guard his own mind from corruption? They announced that the auction will begin shortly. He brushes aside his lingering thoughts, telling himself he is simply overthinking. The first item appears a normal-looking vase, but in his eyes it glows bright gold, a clear sign of value. Bidders raise the price quickly, yet he calmly outbids them all and secures it for 25 million. Even at that price, the vase does not lose its golden glow. He still has 205 million in his account, so he continues. A ring for 3 million, scissors for 1 million, a necklace for 3 million, another item for 5 million. Whispers spread through the room as people begin to wonder what he is doing, watching him purchase item after item. Julie assumes he is simply seeking attention. She cannot believe he would waste such absurd amounts of money for vanity. She is here for only one thing: Winter's Fire, the final item of the auction. Winter's Fire, the Snowflare Stone. This is the element Wu Jin has been waiting for. One of the rarest metals in the world, used to forge weapons of immense power, a material that holds both heat and cold within it. Only dragon bones surpass it, making this the finest possible ingredient for him. Julie wants it as well for her sword. The bidding begins at 10 million and rapidly climbs to 30 million. Just as Julie prepares to raise her paddle, she hears Decluin's voice. 31 million. She turns sharply, anger flashing across her face. Decluin's gaze never leaves the stone. Back and forth the bids rise. Some spectators whisper that he intends to gift it to his fiancée, the famed swordswoman. Others claim he is so deeply in love that he refuses to let her buy it herself. Decluin does not even realize he is competing with Julie. He understands she may resent him for taking it, but that cannot be helped. He needs it more. It has not appeared in 3 years and no one knows when it will surface again. Julie thinks the same. Neither of them is willing to yield. At last, the final call falls at 42 million elni. The winner, Decluin. The crowd erupts, calling it the most intense auction in recent memory. Rumors ignite instantly. Some say he will present the stone to Julie, just as he once showered her with extravagant gifts on their engagement day. But for Julie, that day had been the worst of her life. Surrounded by his wealth, she felt only humiliation. She had wanted a promise fulfilled, not jewels and treasures. That was the day she walked away and ended the engagement. Yet the rumors did not stop. People claimed she had fallen for Decluin, or that she begged for a knight captain's position within his sister's order. She suspects Decluin himself spread those lies to draw her back. No matter what, she could never love a man like him. Decluin approaches her and asks quietly if she had wanted the snowflare stone as well. She assumes he is mocking her again. Instead, he apologizes for taking it. Then, without another word, he turns and leaves. Julie stands frozen. The Decluin she knew would never have apologized. After the auction, her sister Josephine calls her to the carriage. Back at Eucline Manor, Wu Jin senses Julie's anger clearly. Yet strangely, he does not feel that familiar shadow of death looming over him. He wonders just how far Decluin must have pushed her in the original story to drive her to murder. When he returns to the manor, the atmosphere is heavy. He asks what is wrong. Someone informs him that his sister Uriel has returned. She stands waiting in the corridor and confronts him immediately. The funds he spent at the auction, she says, were meant to pay for the mines. Was that why he took her money? He tries to reassure her, insisting that everything he purchased will generate profit. She explodes. She accuses him of treating her like a garbage bin, someone who exists only to clean up his messes. Through tears, she reveals that the estate has been struggling financially. She and the workers have been exhausting themselves to keep it afloat, while he gambles away their savings. She says he has squandered everything their parents left behind, burning through 150 million elni in a single day. The pressure thickens. Wu Jin feels death creeping closer. One wrong sentence and it will be over. But if he retreats now, he will lose everything. He makes a choice. He offers her the position of head of the family. She freezes. Is he serious? She asks. Yes, he answers. She thinks it is another lie, so he swears he will bind it with a mage's oath, a vow that kills the one who breaks it. Her eyes widen. She warns him that if he goes back on his word, she will kill him herself. Then, resolute, she storms off to deal with the chaos left by the auction. Wu Jin exhales slowly. It feels as though a storm has just passed, but he is still alive. Perhaps if he continues making bold, calculated decisions like this, he can finally escape his fate. Just then, Ganesha, who had been quietly spying on him, remarked that he truly meant what he said about changing. Wu Jin called her an unwelcome guest. She apologized, explaining that she had witnessed something shocking. Wu Jin replied that Uriel was better suited to be the head of the family anyway. There was no reason for her to be surprised. Ganesha then dropped a bombshell. Uriel did not have a single drop of Eucline blood. Wu Jin froze. He had never heard that before. Uriel was supposed to be his half-sister, so he already knew they were not fully related by blood. But hearing they were not related at all was something entirely different. Ganesha asked if that was acceptable, reminding him that he had been the one to request an investigation into his background in the first place. Wu Jin steadied himself and said it did not matter. Ganesha observed that he had surprised her quite a bit today. Before leaving, she promised to keep the truth about his relationship with Uriel secret. But she also left him with a warning. The Six Snake Heads organization had begun moving. They were targeting the items he had purchased at the auction. While the auction house would likely deliver them safely, the magical defenses of his estate were so weak that even she could break in without difficulty. With that, she vanished, leaving behind only a handkerchief. Wu Jin remained seated, processing everything. The revelation about Uriel meant nothing to him. He was not the original Decluin, and nothing about how he treated her would change. Meanwhile, deep in the jungle where Ganesha had set up camp, she sat by a fire with her companions. She commented that Decluin was behaving like an entirely different person now. Even a man like him seemed different when he spoke with sincerity. One of her subordinates teased that she simply had a weakness for handsome men and would have liked him regardless. She jokingly threatened to tear him apart for saying that. When he insisted his grandmother thought he was handsome, she laughed and said a handsome man must have been standing behind him when she said it. Another companion, a relative of Julie who worked as an adventurer, asked whether Decluin truly had a human side now. Ganesha confirmed that they would no longer need to monitor him closely. He did not appear interested in enslaving magic users anymore. Before departing, she instructed everyone to keep this discussion secret. Then they gathered together and teleported out of the forest. The next day at the university, Wu Jin was considering ways to strengthen his combat ability when Alan knocked and entered. He handed him a copy of the wizard's journal. Inside was a published warning about the infamous wizard killer, Lockhart, the greatest threat to any mage. Wu Jin felt no concern. He was not just any mage. In fact, part of him almost hoped to cross paths with Lockhart. As he prepared to head to the library, he casually asked Alan whether he had any interest in becoming an assistant professor. Alan answered yes without a moment's hesitation. Then, realizing what he had just said, he nervously asked if Decluin was truly recommending him, even after constantly claiming he had no talent. Decluin replied that he had changed his mind after seeing how earnest Alan was, though in truth he had simply received notice that it was time to select an assistant professor. He handed Alan a bangle engraved with the Eucline emblem. Alan bowed deeply, his eyes brimming with tears. While he was overcome with emotion, Decluin merely thought it would be a waste to let someone so skilled at organizing and handling tasks slip away. Unlike the others who had left Decluin begrudgingly, Alan had remained loyal despite everything. Decluin gave him some money and told him to celebrate with a proper dinner. Alan tried to refuse, saying it was too much, but Decluin had already turned and walked away. He headed to the staff-only section of the library, hoping to find anything related to the Luna family, or perhaps a manipulation grimoire to patch the flaws in the spell paper he had found earlier. As he scanned the shelves, he noticed someone familiar, Sylvia. He immediately asked what she was doing inside a staff-only library, catching her completely off guard. 10 minutes before Decluin arrived, Sylvia had come searching for study materials. The librarian had asked Professor Relan what should be done. The professor, who always catered to nobles, allowed her inside without hesitation since Sylvia was the successor of the Iliad family. Her hobby was studying literature and language. She had come to the restricted section to find a novel written in Ethanol, the language of the fairies. After the fairies disappeared, the value of texts written in their language had soared, making the novel increasingly rare. She knew this library housed a copy. Of course, she never expected to run into Decluin here. He asked if she wanted another disciplinary committee meeting. She wondered why he was here when she had heard he never visited this place. She explained that she had received permission from Professor Relan. Decluin asked whether Professor Relan and the librarian condoned violating school regulations and remarked that they might deserve discipline as well. With a flick of magic, he pulled the book from her hands. He asked if she had broken school rules just to find a romance novel. Blushing, she asked how he could read Ethanol. Then she insisted she was only interested in the literature and language. He told her he would let it slide this time, but warned her not to repeat it without proper authorization, unless her goal was to flaunt her family's influence. As he walked away, she stood there, humiliated, wondering how he could possibly read the language of the fairies. Later that day, during practical training in the forest, one of the professors remarked on how composed the students were, even inside the Mountain of Darkness. The mountain held significant importance and was kept under strict security by the university. It served as a real-world training ground. Because of the dangerous beasts and creatures within, protective barriers were maintained, and an on-duty professor always patrolled the area. Professor Ran, already out of breath, asked Decluin who should serve as the on-duty professor this week. Decluin replied that he would take the role himself. Relan immediately began praising how noble and considerate Decluin was for prioritizing the students' safety. But Decluin felt a strange pull deep within him and wanted to investigate it personally. The other professors eventually left him alone. 9 hours later, at a cafe, Ephraim treated several of her friends to expensive ice cream. She now had 100,000 elni. They asked if it was really alright to indulge like this, and Ephraim told them not to hold back. Julia mentioned that she had already submitted the club establishment plan and told everyone to consider this their first official gathering. One of the boys worried that others might hesitate to join, since not many students seemed to be signing up. Julia assured them there was nothing to worry about as long as they managed the club well. They began discussing the training session at the Mountain of Darkness. Ephraim mentioned that 50 students had volunteered, even though accidents occurred there so frequently. Just then, they felt an ominous presence. They rushed outside to investigate. Seeing nothing near the building, they ran toward the mountain, where faint cries for help echoed through the air. Julia tried to stop them, saying something felt wrong, but Ephraim ignored her and ran straight into a teleportation trap. In an instant, she was transported deep into the forest. She heard someone begging for help nearby and called out that she was coming. Ahead of her stood a wounded woman. Right before her eyes, the woman was struck again and screamed in agony. Ephraim spun around, realizing the attack had come from behind her. To her shock, it was Decluin. She demanded to know why he would attack a helpless civilian. Decluin asked her to open her eyes and tell him which part of that demon looked like a helpless woman. The woman's form twisted and transformed into a demon. Decluin asked if she had truly fallen for a demon's illusion magic so easily. With telekinesis, he pulled Ephraim away and told her not to interfere, ordering her to leave. He dragged her further from the fight using his magic. Then he turned back to the demon and said it was time to hunt. The demon, furious at losing easy prey, lunged at him. He dodged swiftly, and the attacks he could not evade were blocked by the metal elements he conjured. After analyzing it, he realized the core embedded in its forehead marked it as a demon specialized in illusions. And because of his own attributes, his metal-based attacks were not particularly effective against it. His blood began to boil. The Euclines had been renowned demon hunters since ancient times, and that lineage was awakening within Decluin. He could not allow a demon standing before him to survive. A rage unlike anything he had felt before surged through him as he faced it. After that, the battle ended in a flash. Even after killing it, Decluin continued insulting the demon's corpse. He understood that this appearance marked the point where the game he had created was meant to begin. 2 days later in the infirmary, Ephraim suddenly jolted awake. She asked the nurse what had happened in the woods. The nurse explained that a demon had appeared in the mountain of darkness, that Ephraim had been bewitched by its magic and lost consciousness. She was later found and brought to the clinic. The mountain had since been closed and investigations were ongoing. The nurse added that Decluin was the one who had saved her. Ephraim did not look pleased to hear that. She also learned that she had been asleep for 36 hours. Ephraim realized it was Wednesday and bolted upright, saying she was late. She rushed to class and arrived with barely any time to spare. Julia waved her over and called her name. She said she had gone to the clinic to visit, but Ephraim hadn't woken up. Ephraim replied that she was in the best condition possible after sleeping so much. Noticing ingredients laid out on the desks, she asked Julia if she had missed something. Julia said the ingredients had already been there before she arrived. Decluin entered the room with Alan, who was carrying a box. Ephraim wondered who Alan was. Decluin announced to the class that Alan would be his teaching assistant. The students began whispering. They thought Decluin preferred teaching alone and had never taken on an assistant before. Ephraim felt it made no sense. Her father had remained a researcher into his 30s because he was never able to become Decluin's teaching assistant. Why would Decluin suddenly accept an unknown mage as his aide? Decluin explained that today's lesson would be experiential learning. He instructed them to solve the assigned task within 3 hours. Alan handed each student a timer. Ephraim glanced at the bracelet she had inherited. Every time she looked at it, she wondered what her father had meant to Decluin. Why hadn't Decluin given her father a chance? Why was he changing now? She tried to focus and construct a spell, but her thoughts kept tangling together. At 25 minutes and 15 seconds, one student had already finished. Of course, it was Sylvia. Decluin walked over, examined her work, and said the spell was perfect. He exempted her from the rest of class. As Sylvia left, she glanced at Ephraim, who was still struggling, and scoffed. Ephraim pushed herself harder, trying to finish quickly. Julia completed the task next, and after her the others finished one by one, everyone except Ephraim. She felt like it was over for her. Not only had she failed to outperform Sylvia, she hadn't even completed the assignment. Why was she like this? Was she just stupid? Unable to handle something so simple? Maybe she should give up. She hadn't even attended the academy properly. How could she compete with them? Just then, Decluin announced that 5 hours and 47 minutes had passed. He asked how long she intended to keep him waiting. Ephraim had assumed he left when class ended. He said she had broken down over a simple task and couldn't even finish it. She apologized. He told her that even if people mocked her, even if someone stood ahead of her, even if the person she resented was right in front of her, she had to remain cold and logical at all times. With that, he said she would never reach his level with such a weak mindset. He added that he was disappointed in her. He had expected more. After saying that, he left the room. She stood there in silence for a long moment, then slowly sat back down at her desk. Clenching her fist, she whispered that she could do this. Even if he was disappointed, she would finish. And she continued working. Decluin remained outside, waiting for her to complete the task. He knew he had spent over 6 hours on Ephraim, but it was a necessary investment. She needed to grow faster for what was coming. The demon's appearance had confirmed it. The main quest would begin soon. When it did, those aligned with good would become crucial. And if Ephraim grew stronger than expected, she could become a game changer. Right now, she lacked mental resilience and a proper sensitivity to magic. But once she overcame those weaknesses, her growth would be overwhelming. There was always the possibility that her strength might one day threaten him. Still, it was a risk worth taking. Fate was nothing more than a religion for those who refused to put in effort. He believed in himself. And with Decluin's personality, he would never allow a young mage like her to surpass him so easily. The classroom door opened. Ephraim stepped out. Decluin quickly stepped back inside to check her work. She had completed it. He noted the time, 6 hours and 25 minutes. He wrote that she displayed the innate flaws of a non-academy graduate. However, the quality of her result was worthy of being considered for first place. Later, as he left the university, a man in a white suit approached him. It was Zeit, the brother of his fiancée, Julie. A cold sweat slid down Decluin's cheek as he gave Zeit a shallow bow. Zeit was the current head of the frightened family, the very one who had strongly pushed for Decluin and Julie's betrothal. More importantly, his combat strength surpassed even Ganesha's, placing him among the top 3 strongest. Why would someone like that seek him out? Decluin wondered if it was about the Snowflare Stone. If so, this could become a fatal variable. He had no cards to play against a monster like Zeit. Zeit stopped in front of him, towering over him. He said he was simply concerned, since Decluin and Julie had not been getting along lately. He mentioned that he planned to arrange a dinner within the week, and asked if that would be acceptable. Decluin felt a small sense of relief that Zeit appeared friendly for now. He agreed to attend, but before he could finish speaking, Zeit placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. He said he liked people who made quick decisions and promised to prepare a menu suited to Decluin's tastes. He added that he would personally take responsibility for the dinner. The way he said it felt less like hospitality and more like a warning not to miss it. Decluin had wanted to postpone, but he was never given the chance to refuse. Zeit was a man who valued his household above all else. If Decluin interfered with his plans, there was no telling what he would do. The next morning at the Frighten estate, a commotion broke out early. Julie refused to attend the dinner. She argued that the two of them despised each other, and she was already busy training with the knights to make up lost time before meeting Decluin. Zeit asked if she was sulking over a single snowflare stone being taken from her. She insisted she was not sulking. A knight of the frightened family stood nearby, silently watching the siblings argue. Zeit said that Decluin must have bought the stone to forge it into a weapon for her. After all, a mage would have no need for such an item. Julie shouted that if he truly presented her with a sword, she would immediately break off the engagement. Zeit's calm demeanor cracked. He told her to think carefully. Breaking the engagement would be foolish. There was no place for emotions in politics. He said he was certain there was no man she favored, then asked if she had taken a liking to someone. She firmly replied that there was no such person. He asked if it was because of Decluin's poor record. She said it had nothing to do with that. He demanded a valid reason. She remained silent. After waiting for an answer, he lost patience and turned to leave. He told her to be on time and settle any issues at the dinner. Once her brother was gone, Julie clenched her fist. She unsheathed her sword and began striking at empty air, her swings sharp and unfocused. The knight behind her spoke up, saying her blade felt turbulent. His name was Veyron. Julie apologized for revealing such an unsightly side of herself. Veyron said it was nothing, he understood. He admitted he had never once believed that an abominable man like Decluin was suitable for her. For her brother to force her into marrying such a man was simply too much. She stopped him. She told him it did not suit a knight to speak ill of others behind their backs. Looking at him, she smiled faintly and said he should not dirty his hands for her sake. Then she turned and left. Veyron, however, began plotting. He believed he had found the answer to her anguish and suffering, a way to prove his loyalty as her vassal, something only he could accomplish. He swore to make her happy. At the Burke Assembly of Elders, news of demon sightings in the Mountain of Darkness was brought forward. The Union insisted they had to act quickly now that demons had appeared. The elders decided to send letters to the 12 sorcerers. One of those letters was addressed to Decluin. Back at Decluin's manor, the items he had purchased at the auction were finally delivered. He chose to keep the ring and the necklace that aided mana recovery. The rest, following Ganesha's suggestion, he planned to secure in a vault. There was just one problem, the most important item. He could not move it even an inch with telekinesis. Was the mana within the stone resisting him? Then he recalled something he had read in the library. A flame sword must be tamed. It was written in a book titled Communion. Did that mean forming an understanding with the item itself? He reached out and touched it. The moment his fingers made contact, pain twisted his expression and brilliant light flooded the room. He pulled his hand back immediately. To comprehend a mere 0.1% of it, he had expended 2,000 mana. At that rate, it would take at least a year. Was that truly the best use of his time? He set the thought aside. It was time to prepare for the dinner Zeit had arranged. But as he glanced at the calendar, another date caught his eye 3 days away. It had been marked before he possessed this body. The death anniversary, he murmured. He arrived at the upscale restaurant and was greeted by Zeit. Zeit thanked Decluin for coming and said Julie was already inside. He added that Julie looked stunning tonight. When Decluin saw her, he was momentarily taken aback. She looked breathtaking. No wonder the original Decluin had fallen for her. He had never known, since she always wore armor around him. Then an unfamiliar voice chimed in, saying they had put considerable effort into making Julie look that way. Zeit turned and asked why she was there. She replied that she had tagged along since she was the one who picked out Julie's dress. Decluin had been too focused on Julie to notice her at first. It was Josephine, Julie's sister. Though she acted as if she were merely accompanying her sibling to a marriage meeting, she was the one person Decluin needed to guard against above all others. A woman who would use any means to achieve her goals. A sociopath. The hidden mastermind behind an underground intelligence network operating in the shadows. Her strength was comparable to Zeit's. The only person Josephine truly cherished was Julie, and anyone who wronged Julie would face her wrath. He did not know why she had not killed him yet, but he could feel it. From the moment she noticed him, she had been radiating killing intent. If even he could sense a sociopath's murderous aura, then this death variable was dangerously real. If he wanted to leave this dinner alive, he had to prove that Decluin was serious about Julie. Zeit suggested they discuss business before the meal arrived. He asked when Decluin planned to hold the wedding ceremony, since it had already been over 3 years since the engagement. Julie tried to interrupt, but Zeit cut her off, saying the adults were speaking. Decluin hesitated. Zeit urged him to speak his mind. Decluin glanced briefly at Josephine, then answered that he would leave the relationship entirely in Julie's hands. He said he was prepared to dissolve the engagement if she did not wish to marry him. Julie's expression only darkened. Zeit asked how he could speak so lightly of dissolving the engagement. Was it because they had grown distant lately? He reminded Decluin that the family elders would never approve. Julie raised her voice again and demanded to speak privately with Decluin. Zeit looked at him for a moment, then left the room with Josephine. As she stepped out, Josephine smiled faintly and said she hoped the two of them would have a pleasant conversation. The door closed. Julie broke the silence first. She asked what Decluin was plotting this time. With a cold gaze, she demanded to know what he wanted now. Outside, Josephine could clearly hear every word of their conversation. After sending her brother and sister outside, Julie turned back to him and asked what Decluin wanted. Decluin's true concern, however, was Josephine. He knew she was listening from behind the door. He was certain the entire room had been covered with listening devices. Even though she had laughed lightly on her way out, there was no way she would simply leave. But Josephine did not know that he was aware of her surveillance, and that gave him an opportunity. If he could make her believe that Decluin truly loved her precious little sister, he might just avoid death. So he began to move carefully. He told Julie he had been sincere. She did not believe him. He said he could not dissolve the engagement as easily as she thought. Things between their families had gone too far. Julie asked what dirty method he was planning to use this time to torment her. She reminded him that he had used his connections to force the engagement in the first place. She brought up how he had promised compensation to her family's elders. He tried to reason with her, but she snapped. Every time she picked up a sword, her elders warned that fighting was dangerous. Because of him, she had been forced to give up pursuing the imperial order. His brazen suggestion that she take the mantle of captain of the Knights Order under the Yukline family had spread countless rumors about her. After all that, she said, she would never trust him again. Decluin remained silent. Wu Jin understood. Everything the original Decluin had done before he possessed this body was unforgivable. No wonder she hated him so deeply. He promised he would not repeat those mistakes. She immediately said she would not fall for it. He told her he knew he had been holding her back. He was aware of his wrongdoings. Julie looked genuinely surprised. Decluin continued, saying he was not the only one at fault. Her brother and elder sister had gone too far as well. She tried to defend them, but he cut in gently. If that were not true, they would not oppose dissolving the engagement so fiercely. Was it really just about family reputation? He made sure Josephine could hear every word. He told Julie he knew she would have to leave her family one day to pursue her dream of becoming a defender. Her overprotective siblings would never want that. He admitted that he was not a man of honesty or loyalty. She frowned and asked what he meant. He clarified that he was the opposite of everything she valued. He was not suitable for her, but there was one thing he could offer. They could continue the engagement in name only. He would never marry her. She could use his name as a shield for as long as she needed, until her dream became reality. She asked what motive he had for doing all this. He said he expected nothing in return. But if he were to hope for anything, it would be that she show him her smile at least once a month. That was all he wanted. Julie went from speechless to visibly flustered in seconds. Even Josephine outside the door was taken aback. Wu Jin thought the words were absurd, but absurdity was a small price compared to staying alive a little longer. Julie began muttering under her breath, her cheeks faintly flushed. In his eyes, she looked unexpectedly adorable. He could not help but realize that the love the original Decluin held for her was beginning to overlap with his own feelings. Julie cleared her throat and declared she would never fall for his schemes. Decluin let out a soft laugh. She panicked even more at the sound. Outside, Josephine narrowed her eyes, wondering if Decluin's feelings were genuine. For now, she decided not to make a move. 3 days later, it was the date marked on the calendar, the death anniversary. Decluin went to the cemetery. A strange heaviness settled in his chest, stirred by the atmosphere alone. His heart had belonged to this place long before he possessed Decluin's body. These were not Decluin's memories, they were Wu Jin's. Years ago, his girlfriend had suddenly told him she wanted to add an Easter egg to the game they were developing. She said she wanted to expand Decluin's background since he was only a minor boss. Wu Jin had argued that it would only increase their workload. They were already pulling all-night shifts, but she insisted it mattered. If they were making a game, they had to pour their hearts into it. In the end, he gave up trying to convince her. It was clear she had already made up her mind. She assured him it was a good idea, it would not be pointless. Then she revealed it. Decluin would have a deceased fiancé. He remembered how brightly she had laughed while explaining it. Now standing before the tombstone, he wondered whether to call it brilliant as she once had or cruel as it now felt. Her name was engraved on the stone. Below it, a message thanking him. Why had she done this? Why had she modeled Decluin after him? Why had she named the bereaved fiancé after herself? And why thank him? He reached out and touched the cold surface of the tomb. Tears streamed down his face as he tried to understand her reasons. It felt as if he could almost hear her whisper. Memories flooded back endlessly the longer he stood there. The way she used to smile while praising his drawings. The coat she placed over his shoulders when he shivered in the winter cold. The warmth of her hand in his as she told him she loved him. The way she lifted his spirits whenever he felt exhausted. 7 years together. 7 years with her always by his side. As he wept quietly before the grave, someone nearby watched him with a hardened, angered expression. He called Decluin a filthy mage. After a moment, Decluin steadied himself and walked toward his car. Then he noticed a familiar face. Lockhart, the mage killer he had seen in the newspaper. Lockhart smirked and said he hadn't expected Decluin to know his name. He asked how an arrogant, conceited mage like him dared to say it so casually. Lockhart was a villain designed for those who chose the mage class. His greatest weapon was his ability to nullify all magic, which made him a natural enemy of mages. He charged forward. Decluin immediately began testing his limits. He cast a spell, it was nullified just as expected. He shifted to physical-type magic, that too was erased. Lockhart laughed, calling him a foolish mage who understood nothing. He slashed with his dagger. Decluin dodged once, then again. Most mages would panic the moment their magic failed. Decluin did not. When Lockhart leapt at him, he was met with a brutal punch straight to the face. Lockhart crashed onto the ground. Decluin said calmly that it meant nothing if he could not use magic. Lockhart cursed as Decluin stepped forward and pressed his foot against his face. A few days earlier, Decluin had inscribed another magic circle onto his body. It had refined his mana quality and sharpened his control. He had continued his training routine afterward. When he attempted pull-ups, the metal bar had bent under his grip, leaving deep dents behind. Seconds later, Lockhart regained consciousness and immediately began shouting again. He said all mages were frauds, helpless without their magic. Decluin asked if he was from the Red Film race. Lockhart's eyes widened. He demanded to know how Decluin knew. They were more commonly known now as the Blood Shroud race, born wrapped in a crimson film. Their bloodline was said to descend from demons of ancient times. Because of that lineage, they were forced to hide their identities. They stood as opposites to mages. Since magecraft had been created to fight demons, the conflict between mages and the Blood Shroud race had become central to history. Even now, their people were hunted simply for their ancestry. Decluin knew this. He said quietly that what Lockhart endured was disgraceful. But that was no excuse to slaughter innocent mages. Lockhart snapped, telling him to stop preaching and just kill him already. Decluin replied that he knew the Blood Shroud race was not inherently evil. Lockhart scoffed, asking what a mere mage could possibly understand. Decluin answered that he was a Eucline, from a lineage of honorable nobles who had never abandoned their dignity. Lockhart sneered, asking if he was trying to sound noble before executing him. Decluin cut him off. The only time he ever lost control was in the presence of a demon. The Eucline bloodline had hunted demons since ancient times. It was instinct, something they could not suppress. But he had not lost control facing Lockhart. He asked him directly had he wavered under provocation or gone berserk. No, because Lockhart was human. Decluin told him he could trust him. At that moment, several people came running toward them. Without hesitation, Decluin kicked Lockhart in the face, knocking him unconscious. Inspector Roa arrived and saluted Decluin. Then he asked if he should kick Lockhart a few more times on Decluin's behalf. Decluin says there's no need and uses his magic to craft a steel wire. He tells Roa that ordinary handcuffs won't work on Lockhart and asks him to bind the man with the wire instead. Then he asks how Roa found him. Roa replies that he came after receiving a report and asks if Decluin wasn't the one who filed it. Decluin thanks the officer for taking over and leaves. The next day, in his training room, Decluin receives an invitation to the Burke meeting. He asks if his sister really came all this way just to hand him the letter. She says she had no choice since he showed no interest, and as the reciting head, it's her duty to handle family matters. The meeting concerns the recent incident where a demon appeared in the mountains. The letter states that he must attend in a week, accompanied by one guard. His sister asks if he plans to take Jeff. Decluin replies that Jeff is good for nothing except driving. She tells him he can't travel without protection, especially on the road to Burke where no one's life is guaranteed. Decluin asks if she's worried about him. She flusters, denies it, and begins to panic. After calming herself, she tells him to leave the guard issue to her, as she'll commission someone from a trustworthy place. At Fraheim's training grounds, Julie orders the knights to focus. The captain watches her from a distance, wondering what he's supposed to do. Vaughn appears behind him and asks what he means. The captain jumps, telling Vaughn to at least make some noise when he walks. He explains they've received a major commission, but it's troublesome and he's unsure whether to accept it. Vaughn suggests telling Julie and deciding together. The captain hesitates, saying that's the bigger problem since the mission is to guard Decluin. Vaughn clenches his fists. The captain adds that it's not a simple escort but protection for an entire train carrying Decluin, and success would greatly raise the order's reputation. He also mentions that the vice captain, Julie, and Decluin aren't exactly on good terms. Vaughn cuts him off, saying the vice captain would never let personal feelings interfere with a mission. The captain agrees and goes to inform Julie. Behind him, Vaughn's killing intent intensifies. Burke is the name of the Alpine region in the northern part of the continent, sitting at an altitude of about 3,500 meters. It is home to the Elders, the mages who stand at the pinnacle. Sorcery schools across the continent submit their theories there, and the decisions made in Berk must be followed even by royal mages. Its influence is immense. The summoning assembly is rare, something a mage might witness only once in several decades. To attend is both an honor and proof of one's renown, yet the summoning is also known as a mage's grave. At the train station, Julie asks the captain if the preparations are thorough. He assures her they are. Vaughn says Decluin is arriving. Decluin approaches the train with Alan. Julie greets him and, flustered, announces that from this point on their order will be in charge of guarding the train. She remembers the promise they made at dinner and wonders how she's supposed to smile, a wide grin or just a small one. Watching her, the captain thinks she's acting strange. She used to utterly loathe him, yet now she's doing her utmost to fulfill her duty. The captain tries to say he'll handle the talking, but Vaughn steps forward and introduces himself, stating he's the one assigned to guard duty this time. The captain adds that Vaughn is a skilled man recognized by the entire order. Suspicious, Decluin quietly assesses him but senses nothing unusual. Julie wishes them a safe journey and walks away, then suddenly turns back and gives Decluin an awkward smile. Decluin smiles back, slightly unsettled. Several hours later on the train, Decluin tells Alan he can nap if he wants. Alan immediately agrees. While Alan sleeps, Decluin remains alert. The journey to Berk is never simple. Unexpected incidents occur almost every time there's a summoning. The most infamous is the train attack, one of the hardest events to survive. The game randomly selects which train is safe. Those who want certainty can buy information through underground channels about which trains will be targeted. Originally, Decluin would have done exactly that. But after Wujin possessed him, all such underground connections were severed. With that option gone, Decluin made other preparations to ensure his safety. He glances at Alan, who is sleeping soundly after making such a fuss about how excited he was for the trip. When Alan first heard the news, he even cried, claiming he wasn't worthy to serve as Decluin's assistant. The train stops at another station without incident. All the other passengers disembark. Only one remains. This is the final stop before their destination. Decluin thinks that perhaps all his preparations were unnecessary since nothing has happened. He bought high-defense clothing and enhanced it further with his Midas touch, reinforcing it to the limit. He had also hardened his wood-steel shurikens and even handed Alan one of the high-defense robes. After pushing his skill to its limit, his mana was nearly drained. He couldn't help thinking it was a complete waste. He sighs, hoping the rest of the journey will pass without incident. But the moment the train rolls onto a bridge, the bridge explodes. A few days before Decluin left, Sylvia's father asked why she was glued to her book even on the train, and whether it was a university assignment. She replied that aside from the assignment, she had also missed a few classes. Her father smiled with pride, saying she worked hard despite already being confirmed as an archmage. Sylvia quietly asked if she was truly worthy of that title if she didn't put in at least this much effort. She felt regretful about missing Professor Decluin's classes. Then she asked why they were heading to the Berk assembly so early, when they could have left a few days later. Her father sighed and asked if she had ever heard the trips to Berk being called a mage's graveyard. She said she thought it was just a ghost story. He told her it was. Whenever a summoning came from Berk, mages always died. 15 years ago, 11 lost their lives. For generations, receiving a summon from Berk was the greatest honor for a family. If one of the 20 registered families was chosen to attend, their name would be carved into history. But if a summoned family failed to appear at the assembly, they would be permanently removed from the registry, and a new family would take their place. He asked her what she thought families outside the registry would do for that chance. She answered her own question, saying they would aim for the lives of those already registered. He explained that they were rushing because he had received intel about a group planning to attack the later trains. Since she was with him, they had to be extra cautious, and if others discovered that information, they would surely become targets. Seeing the shock on her face, he added that dying on the way to the assembly was practically considered a natural death. Back in the present, as the train crosses the bridge, the explosion tears through it. Decluin reacts instantly. The entire train begins to glow blue. Alan jolts awake and sees a massive hole torn through the carriage. The whole train is suspended in midair. Decluin feels a surge of relief. He managed to lift it in time. The attackers stare in disbelief, muttering that this is absurd, asking if all professors are simply built differently. Their leader reminds them of the handsome reward awaiting success and orders them to move. They leap into the very carriage Decluin occupies. Decluin calls them fools. His wood-steel shurikens launch at once, slicing through the intruders and eliminating them in seconds. Alan starts shouting that they're under attack. Decluin knocks him unconscious without hesitation and tells Vaughn to get Alan and the remaining passengers to safety immediately. Vaughn grabs Alan and jumps off the train. Once Vaughn leaves, Decluin turns to the two intruders who survived and calmly tells them their deaths will also be ruled natural causes. Vaughn takes his time evacuating the others, deliberately slow. Decluin finishes the last of the attackers, but the strain catches up to him. Lifting an entire train and fighting right after has drained nearly all his mana. He's exhausted. Vaughn arrives just as the battle ends and reports that all passengers have been moved to safety. Decluin nods and says Vaughn did well, but before he can suggest they retreat as well, he senses something shift. At first, he assumes it's lingering tension from the attack. Then he notices it clearly, the death variable emanating from Vaughn. He wonders how Vaughn managed to conceal it so perfectly until now. Vaughn draws his sword and says he's glad Decluin survived, because now he can kill him with his own hands. Decluin asks if Julie ordered this. Vaughn explodes in anger, shouting at him not to utter his master's name. He declares that Decluin will die by his blade for his master's sake. Decluin realizes Vaughn is acting on his own. Then he recalls the captain's words that Vaughn is one of their finest knights. Facing him with almost no mana left is pure suicide. Vaughn announces that his guard duty is officially over and lunges at Decluin. Decluin blocks the strike with a woodsteel shuriken. In that instant, he sees his only path to survival. He immediately cancels his telekinesis. The train drops. At Burke, Sylvia's guard knight tries to cheer her up by bringing her some ice cream. She says she doesn't want any and asks whether all the participants of the assembly have arrived. The knight replies that aside from Decluin and Ilhelm, everyone is present. He then asks if she's waiting for someone. She quickly denies it and the knight leaves her alone. Under her breath, she softly whispers Decluin's name. She says she never meant to see what she saw. That day, like always, she had gone to the graveyard to visit her mother. She had been complaining to her about how Professor Decluin kept assigning so much work. Then she heard a car pull up and quickly hid behind the trees. To her surprise, it was Decluin. Even from the sight of his slightly slouched back, she could feel the noble posture he carried. It was unmistakably him at a glance. She wondered why he was there. She had always thought he was incapable of mourning anyone. But as he turned to leave, she saw the tears in his eyes. The man who was always cold and haughty was crying. She was captivated. To her, he had always been an annoying professor who acted superior, yet even he carried the pain of losing someone. His tears burned into her memory like falling stars. So when her father told her about the planned attacks on the later trains, it unsettled her. She remembered his lectures and decided to try something. Using a Mona stone as a medium, she focused for hours. Eventually, she succeeded in creating a magical pigeon. She named it Swift, and she sent it flying, asking it to show her what it saw. Meanwhile, back at the train, Decluin rises after the impact. The train has caught onto the mountainside and hasn't fallen completely. He can feel a few broken bones, but they'll heal soon. Then he senses it again, the death variable. Vaughn rushes at him, completely unharmed. Decluin tries to fire a shuriken, but it deflects off Vaughn's body. Vaughn calls him persistent and attacks again. He is unquestionably stronger, even if Decluin were at full power. But Decluin's nature would never allow him to bow, even when utterly outmatched. He blocks another thrust. This time, Vaughn's blade pierces through the woodsteel defense. Decluin knows he's in danger. With the sword inches from his body, a single thought flashes through his mind. If he dies here, what happens next? Is it game over? Does he return to his office as if nothing occurred? Before the blade can strike, the space inside the train carriage suddenly distorts. Vaughn jerks in shock. A sharp pain shoots through his wrist. His hand flies off, cleanly severed. He screams. Decluin doesn't understand what just happened, but he doesn't hesitate. Using the last of his mana, he fires a shuriken at Vaughn's foot. Vaughn loses his balance and tumbles toward the opening in the carriage. Just before falling, he drives a knife into the train floor, barely saving himself. Decluin walks toward him. Vaughn, confused and in pain, demands to know what Decluin just did. Decluin says he doesn't know either, but asks a more important question. Why is Vaughn trying to kill him when he's done nothing to him? Vaughn asks if Decluin has forgotten all the evil he committed against his master. Decluin asks what Julie means to Vaughn for him to go this far. Vaughn says Decluin would never understand. When he was a child, he once got into trouble with a noble's son. Julie was the knight assigned to handle the matter. Vaughn insisted he was innocent, that the noble boy had started it. The noble's mother defended her son, claiming her child would never do such a thing, while the boy smirked behind her. Julie remained silent at first. The woman accused Vaughn of assault and trespassing. Julie calmly asked whether he had truly trespassed, and the woman confirmed it. Julie glanced at the tall gates and wondered aloud how such a scrawny child could have climbed such a fence. She offered to escort him to the police herself, and the woman readily agreed. As they walked away, Vaughn insisted he had only defended himself and there was no need for police. Eventually, Julie told him she knew the Freya household's reputation and that his words might hold some truth. Vaughn snapped, saying it wasn't partial truth, it was the complete truth. Julie stopped him and said that even so, striking someone was still wrong. She grabbed his shoulders and told him that if he wanted to follow her, she would teach him how to control himself. Vaughn was stunned. He asked if she would also give him something to eat. From that day on, he joined the Knight's Order. But because of his past and his temperament, he struggled to get along with the others. The only person who truly cared for him was Julie. Whenever she asked if he was all right, he would answer yes. And he meant it. As long as he could stay by her side, it was enough. She was always ahead of him, upholding justice, never bending to wrongdoing. His admiration grew, so did his love. He knew those feelings would only burden her. He knew his emotions could stand in her way, but even so, he believed he had to kill Decluin before Decluin brought ruin upon Julie. Decluin listens in silence, then he tells Vaughn he's wrong. Woojin says he will correct what Decluin once did. He extends his hand and tells Vaughn to hold on, promising he would never harm Julie. Vaughn lowers his gaze for a brief second. Then Decluin feels it again, the death variable creeping toward him. He steps back, realizing Vaughn has no intention of changing his mind. Vaughn coldly declares that he will never waver. Decluin calls him a fool, saying that this reckless choice will torment his master for the rest of her life. At that exact moment, Julie feels something strange. The captain notices and asks if she's all right. She says she is. He asks if she's worried about Vaughn again and reassures her that Vaughn can handle himself. Julie nods. Meanwhile, as Vaughn falls toward his death, he silently hopes Julie will find happiness. Outside, a magical pigeon flies above the wrecked train. Through its eyes, Sylvia sees everything, how Decluin killed his guard in self-defense. Her knight approaches and informs her that the assembly is about to begin. As she walks with him, she silently hopes Decluin will make it in time. At the accident site, Vice Chief Lilia oversees the investigation. When she asks about the explosion, the workers explain that such incidents are common whenever the Burke summoning assembly is held. She asks about casualties. They tell her no passengers were injured, but 2 people are missing, a guard named Vaughn and Professor Decluin. They gesture toward the survivors and suggest she question them. The survivors explain they were saved by a knight while the train was suspended in midair. Lilia pauses and asks what they mean by midair. One of them shows her a photograph of the train floating above the ground. She stares at it and mutters that lifting an entire train with magic is absurd. Just then, a voice speaks directly into her mind, informing her that the knight is dead, that he attempted to kill Decluin but ultimately failed. She spins around, searching for the speaker, but no one is there. At that moment, the survivors point toward someone approaching. It's Decluin. The clash with Vaughn had been dangerously close. If not for the unseen person who severed Vaughn's hand, the body at the bottom of that cliff would have been his, not a nameless knight who wasn't even part of the original game. He wonders who intervened. Lilia steps forward and says she has a few questions about the incident. Decluin looks at her and asks for the time. He has 6 hours left to reach the assembly. She attempts to question him again, but he cuts her off and asks whether the destroyed train was the only route to Burke. Annoyed, she answers that there are road paths and sea routes as alternatives. She tries once more to stop him, but he's already gone. Turning back to the workers, she asks if Decluin was just standing there moments ago. They speculate he may have used acceleration magic. She frowns, wondering how he still has so much mana, enough to halt a falling train, defeat assassins, duel a skilled knight, and now cast high-level acceleration magic. A thought crosses her mind. Is this what Lockhart warned her about regarding Decluin? At the Burke assembly, the great families gather. While quiet conversations ripple through the hall, Sylvia's father remarks that the time for the stars to align is near, and the meeting will soon begin. Sylvia keeps glancing at Decluin's empty seat, hoping he will arrive. Seated high above them all, the High Elder expresses humble gratitude to those who answered the summons. His mana is overwhelming. Even the sound of his voice makes Sylvia uneasy. High Elder Dessicton is one of the strongest candidates to become the next Archmage. If she ever hopes to challenge for that title, she knows she must stand at least at his level. The High Elder announces that the meeting will begin with roll call. If a summoned house fails to respond after being called 3 times, they will be declared absent. Sylvia's father answers when called. A lady from the Bran household responds next. Then a man from the Viord family. Ilhelm of the Rewind family answers as well. Finally, the name of Decluin of the Uckland family is called. There is no response. The High Elder calls his name again. Around the hall, nobles begin to murmur. Some whisper that it would be historic if the Uckline family were erased from the registry, especially since they were the very first household ever summoned. Others scoff, saying it's only natural. The current head, Decluin, is nothing compared to his ancestors. They mock him openly. Sylvia calls them pathetic in her mind. For reasons she can't explain, hearing them speak ill of Decluin unsettles her. The High Elder calls his name for the final time. At that moment, the doors behind Sylvia open. She turns sharply. Decluin steps inside, calmly brushing snow from his shoulder, adjusting his hair, then announcing his presence before the High Elder as if nothing unusual has occurred. After roll call concludes, the meeting moves forward without delay. The first matter concerns the demon that appeared in the Black Mountain. The acting head of the Brand family, Ethensel, proposes that each school issue orders or coordinate with the church to dispatch holy mages to suspicious regions. No family objects. The matter closes swiftly. A voice announces a short recess. Decluin exhales in relief. He ran without rest for 6 hours to make it here. His stamina is gone, his mana is nearly depleted. Though he arrived battered and exhausted, no one questions him. His natural composure hides everything. Just as he is about to step outside, someone calls his name. He turns. It's Alan. Tears in his eyes. Alan asks if Decluin is all right and apologizes for arriving late, explaining he wasn't permitted inside after the meeting began. Decluin can no longer see Alan as merely an innocent child. If anyone would notice that he is no longer the original Decluin, it would be him. Woojin recalls a line from a movie he once watched back on Earth. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. He tells Alan to remain by his side from now on. He needs to know exactly where Alan stands. When the break ends, the High Elder introduces the next topic, the Bloodshroud Sorcerers. This time the atmosphere shifts. The matter is far more sensitive and will not conclude so easily. A man slams his hand on the table and declares that the Bloodshrouds are like cockroaches, breeding in secret, laying their eggs within human society. Athansel demands evidence. There is no reliable way to distinguish Bloodshrouds from ordinary people. The man insists that a method must be found so they can be eradicated completely. Athansel warns him to choose his words carefully. He presses on, claiming the Bloodshrouds are gathering in secret and that he is certain they have a leader. Athansel calls it baseless speculation. The man turns to the assembly and asks whether they do not find it repulsive that Bloodshrouds live among them. Several nod. He reminds them of the countless mages who died 60 years ago because of the council's hesitation. His gaze lingers on Athansel, who remains silent. Sylvia's father then turns to Decluin and asks for his opinion, reminding the hall that the Ucklines are great exorcists who have long stood at the forefront of demon eradication. Decluin understands exactly what he is being pushed toward, but suppressing the Bloodshrouds is something Woojin cannot support. If he cannot stop this tide, he can at least slow it. After all, to this world, the Bloodshrouds are deemed a common enemy. Decluin speaks. He says the Bloodshrouds are always labeled aggressors, yet when one examines the historical records, most conflicts began with misunderstandings. An elderly man demands clarification. Decluin explains that 237 years ago, during the Roger Witch incident, the Rodrians were falsely accused of witchcraft despite their innocence. What followed was a sweeping purge and many Bloodshrouds were slaughtered. They retaliated, and the cycle of bloodshed began. He adds that the tragedy from 60 years ago, the one just mentioned, was deeply entangled in politics. A monostone mine had been discovered on land inhabited by Bloodshrouds. The old man snaps, shouting that 60 years ago it was a Uckline who seized the mine and slaughtered countless Bloodshrouds, and that someone from such a family has no right to speak. He insists the Bloodshrouds are born with demonic energy, and that the Uckline family famed for hunting demons should know this better than anyone. Decluin corrects him calmly. His family's tradition is to hunt demons, not Bloodshrouds. The old man roars back that Bloodshrouds are demons. Decluin's expression turns cold. He asks whether the old man is prepared to take responsibility for those words. Declaring humans to be demons so casually is reckless, he says, and someone who does so may well become the true demon himself. Furious, the old man storms out. Sylvia's father sighs and says it's a shame he must be away from her until the next meeting. She reminds him the next session is only tomorrow, yet he still tears up as they part. After being assigned her room, Sylvia reads the note handed to her. She assumes the warnings written inside are merely meant to frighten young attendees, then prepares for bed. Later that night she wakes up thirsty. Still half asleep, she walks toward the door. The room shifts. In an instant she is no longer inside her chamber but standing in a corridor. Her heart pounds. She quickly checks the instruction note again. It clearly states that once a person lies down, they must not wake before morning or they risk being transported to a random location within the building. She frowns. This never happened while she stayed in the second hall these past 2 days. Perhaps it's because she is now closer to the elders, where the mana is denser. She had assumed it wouldn't affect her as long as she didn't leave her room. As she struggles to steady herself, she senses something behind her. She runs. The instructions warn that she must not leave the floor, and if she encounters an open door, she must never enter or she may be trapped inside forever. Panicking, she pounds on a closed door, begging for help. But the rules also state that if someone knocks on your door at night, you must ignore it and make no sound. She runs down the corridor, calling out desperately. Tears stream down her face. Then a door opens. A calm voice asks if she is lost. It's Decluin. He steps aside and lets her in. She quickly thanks him. Inside, she apologizes and explains how she suddenly found herself in the hallway after getting out of bed. Decluin tells her that Burke is filled with spirits who lost their consciousness to magic. That is why the rules exist. She should have read the note more carefully. Even now, he carries that same unchanging expression and steady gaze. She wonders if it is because he is Decluin that he can open the door without consequence. A sound echoes from outside. Dense mana seeps through the cracks of the door. It's the ghost that was chasing her. She tenses again, but Decluin tells her to stay still. His wood-steel shurikens shoot past her, slicing through the spirit in a single motion. She stares at the blades in awe and asks how he defeated a roaming ghost so easily. Decluin replies that it was merely a simple killing spell, nothing to boast about. Magic was never meant to exist for the sake of killing. His words sink deep into her heart. She gathers herself and casts the flowing flame spell he taught in class. Decluin says she executed it correctly. She follows with lightning metallization, then goblin magic. Each time he calmly tells her she did well. She pouts, complaining that he didn't even look properly before praising her. Deliberately she performs the next spell half-heartedly, curious about his reaction. Decluin still says she did well, then quietly points out the instability in the air magic circle within her spell. She blinks, then she asks him what he believes her weakness is. Decluin answers that it is something she must discover herself. She protests that it's unfair since he told Effine her weakness. Decluin explains that Effine realized it on her own. Sylvia remains unconvinced. He gently tells her to temper her impatience. Time is on her side. As long as she remains as dedicated as she is now, she will continue to grow. There is no need to rush to the end. She should take it step by step. After all, she is one of only 3 people in the world blessed with such extraordinary talent. She has heard those words countless times growing up, yet somehow hearing them from Decluin feels different. Later that night, as Sylvia sleeps peacefully, Decluin senses something outside, a surge of immense mana, a sign of great value. He quietly steps out to investigate. These mountains are normally inaccessible. If something rare has appeared here, it could be priceless. As he walks, a ghost trails behind him, attempting to frighten him. To its confusion, Decluin completely ignores it. It tries again and again, nothing. Then Decluin suddenly stops and turns, staring straight at it. He calmly asks whether it has seen anything nearby, emitting a large amount of magic. The ghost lets out a pitiful cry and flees. Decluin watches it go, mildly puzzled. A few minutes later, he finds what he was searching for, a purified mana tree. With a wand crafted from its wood, his growth would accelerate significantly. Even for him, this is an unexpected stroke of fortune. The next day, the assembly resumes. It unfolds much like before. Decluin and Vithan, the old man, clash repeatedly over the Bloodshroud issue. The other families watch in surprise. They had expected Decluin to lead the charge against the enemy, not stand in opposition to them. Even Sylvia's father believed Decluin was plotting something. Sylvia sensed the others thought the same as her father, but she knew they were all wrong. Decluin wasn't scheming, he was simply stating what was obvious. The High Elder finally stepped in, cutting off the debate as the Bloodshroud issue spiraled in circles. He postponed the matter to the next meeting and shifted focus to other affairs. Unlike the Bloodshroud dispute, the remaining topics were resolved quickly, and within a few days the meeting came to a close. As they left, the old man deliberately shoved past Decluin. Even though Decluin had only acted in accordance with the quest line, he had entangled himself with far more people than he preferred. The next day, in the shopping district, while searching for materials for his wand, Alan suddenly noticed someone outside and immediately called out to Decluin. He said the woman was his hero, that it was because of her he had safely made it to Burke. Decluin remembered her name, Lilia FM. They decided to treat her to a meal to thank her for helping Alan reach Burke safely. Lilia thanked Decluin and mentioned that the investigation had concluded, though she still wanted to know what had happened to Vaughn. Decluin said he died during the ambush. When the food arrived, Lilia kept staring at Decluin, studying him carefully, wondering what exactly was different about him, just as Lockhart had suggested. Back at the Imperium Security Bureau, Lilia explained that Lockhart was about to be transferred to one of the most notorious prisons for killing innocent mages. She asked if he had anything to say for himself. Lockhart remained silent. She said he had been tight-lipped throughout the interrogation. Then she told him to activate his power. Lockhart looked up, confused. She repeated herself, activate it. He smiled faintly and used his magic nullification ability. The moment the magical monitoring devices shut down, Lilia slammed her hand on the desk and called him a complete idiot for getting himself into trouble after she had warned him not to act rashly, not to do anything that would harm the Bloodshrouds. She said if his identity as a Bloodshroud had been exposed, she would have had no choice but to kill him herself. Lockhart laughed and asked whether leeching off the Empire would still be possible if she killed him. She replied that there was no other way to be exposed unless they were witnessed immediately after birth. Lockhart reminded her that their powers resembled demonic abilities, that people would always fear them. Lilia told him to shut up, saying mages were born with abilities just as strong, if not stronger. Then she demanded to know why he had provoked Decluin of all people, when they were already keeping an eye on him. He asked if they were planning to kill Decluin. Lilia said they were only observing him, unless he continued causing problems. Lockhart told her not to kill Decluin. He said Decluin was a true noble, that there was no need to eliminate him. Lilia asked if he had finally lost his mind after committing so many crimes, spouting such nonsense. Lockhart said that when Decluin declared the Bloodshrouds were not demons but humans, there had been no doubt in his eyes, only righteousness. If there were more nobles like him, Bloodshrouds might one day live openly alongside everyone else. He added that Decluin did not kill him, even after learning he was a blood shroud. Lilia asked whether he had forgotten how the Uckline ancestors once stood at the forefront of slaughtering and oppressing the blood shrouds. Lockhart replied that by that logic, they would be admitting blood shrouds were demons simply because they carried demonic ancestry. Before leaving, Lilia warned him to lie low, at least for now. Back at the restaurant, she found herself replaying his words. To her, Decluin still seemed like the same irritating man as always. Just then someone approached their table. The overwhelming stench of alcohol forced Lilia to cover her nose. Decluin immediately told the man to leave. He had nothing to discuss with him. It was Ilhelm. Ilhelm said he had plenty to discuss with Decluin. At the same time, at the order of Frime, Julie learned about Vaughn's fate. She could hardly believe it. She told the captain to prepare himself, saying Decluin had better provide an explanation the moment he returned. Back at the restaurant, Lilia felt trapped in an awkward situation. Ilhelm said Decluin had truly caught him off guard during the meeting, that he still couldn't understand his decision. He asked why Decluin was siding with the blood shrouds. Lilia couldn't believe what she was hearing. Ilhelm went on, saying Decluin was the very one who once advocated annihilating them, that his academic paper condemning the blood shrouds was still preserved at the university. He asked if Decluin had perhaps found a blood shroud slave to conduct research on. Alan snapped at him, telling Ilhelm to stop insulting Decluin. Decluin told Alan to calm down, saying Ilhelm's brain resembled rotten cheese. It was only natural he would say strange things. Ilhelm quickly shifted topics, mentioning there were only 6 months left until the research presentation. He told Decluin to clean out his office before he left. After Ilhelm walked away, Lilia couldn't stop wondering why Decluin was siding with her race. It was hard to believe. Was this what Lockhart meant? The next day, before leaving Birch, Decluin commissioned one of the finest craftsmen to forge a wand for him. After that, they boarded the train back to the Empire. Unfortunately, they ended up in the same carriage as the old man Vithan. He didn't bother hiding his hostility, though no actual conflict broke out during the ride. At last, the long journey came to an end. After stepping off the train, Alan mentioned there was one final transfer left. But Decluin wasn't listening. Julie and her knights were standing directly in front of him. She stayed silent for a moment, then said she had heard about the ambush and was relieved that Decluin was safe. Decluin thanked her. Judging by the expressions on her knights' faces, they didn't seem pleased that Decluin was the one who survived. Julie said she had read in the news that Vaughn and Decluin worked together to save the victims. Then she said she needed to ask him something. She asked how Vaughn was. Decluin didn't answer. As she waited, he thought about telling her everything, that Vaughn had tried to kill him, that their clash had led to this outcome. But standing before her now, the words wouldn't come. He wondered whether he should tell her the truth, or whether the truth would be too cruel for Julie. She acted strong, but her heart wasn't as unbreakable as she pretended. If she learned what really happened, she would blame herself. She would claim her subordinates' wrongdoing was her own and punish herself endlessly. He decided it was better not to tell her, even if it meant enduring suspicion from others. The conductor announced the train's departure, and people began rushing toward the platform. Decluin finally said it was difficult to explain, that Vaughn had been too emotional. Julie thanked Decluin and said they would go see him now. As she walked away, Woojan thought bitterly that he was laughably similar to Vaughn. He couldn't even get a grasp on the feelings Decluin carried. Alan muttered that the knights had been rude. Just then someone asked why Decluin held himself back. It was Sylvia. She was clearly upset that he hadn't told the truth. Of course, Decluin didn't know what she meant. She handed him a book as a gift, then ran off. Alan asked what the book was. Decluin said he didn't know either. He sighed and told Alan to hurry so they could return home quickly. An inspector later reconstructed the entire attack on the train, including the moment it hung off the cliff and when Vaughn fell. He concluded that both Decluin and Vaughn had done their best to control the situation, but Vaughn fell during the ambush. Julie thanked the inspector, though sadness lingered in her eyes. As she walked away, the other knights asked whether there were any keepsakes to collect, or whether the inspector had discovered who was behind the ambush. The inspector said there were no keepsakes, and explained that it was an unwritten rule. Inspectors were not permitted to investigate crimes that occurred on the way to Burke. Julie stepped up to a cliff and said she had lost her reliable right hand, that he had left this world in vain. She called him a fool. Back at Decluin's mansion, the building trembled as Uriel discovered that he had written another family check. The butler tried to calm her down. She shouted at him, asking if he had forgotten her warnings about the family's finances, saying they wouldn't even last 2 more months without going bankrupt. The check in question was the payment for commissioning the wand. With the family funds this low, Decluin decided to take action. He told Uriel to calm down, assuring her he had ways to secure more money. He walked into the room filled with items he had purchased at the auction. Uriel demanded to know what he was planning and accused him of flaunting wealth they didn't have. Decluin told her to hold herself with more dignity, reminding her she was the next head of the family. That only made her angrier. At first, Decluin had viewed those auction items as solid investments. But while preparing for his trip to Burke, he realized he could increase their value even further, by using his Midas touch. Uriel grew impatient and demanded to know what her brother was doing. The butler gently urged her to mind her language. When Decluin finished, he announced that he would put all the items back up for auction. Uriel stared at him in disbelief and asked if he had lost his mind, selling them so soon after buying them. She insisted their value wouldn't rise unless he held onto them long-term. Decluin told her to be quiet. She snapped back that he couldn't just silence her while throwing away what little money they had left. Decluin turned to Butler Roy and ordered him to call an appraiser and arrange immediate transport for the items. As Roy left, Decluin glanced again at the vase he had purchased. After applying Midas touch, its true nature was revealed. Any flower placed inside would never wilt, and over time would transform into a magical flower, each petal carrying a different effect. He thought perhaps this was one item worth keeping for himself. As the rest of the items were moved, Uriel approached him again and demanded to know if he was truly determined to drive the family into bankruptcy. Decluin assures Uriel that he'll make money and tells her not to worry. She snaps at him, telling him to stop saying that. Before she can press him further, he calmly says he has work to attend to and leaves. At the university, Effie and her friends have established the Ordinary Magic Exploration Club. Inside the club room, they're gathered around a table playing cards. A full house. Kings, Effie says, revealing her hand. The others groan, saying it's the third time she's won in a row. With a proud smile, Effie exempts herself from cleaning duty for the week. As laughter fills the room, she suddenly feels like it's all a dream. She was born into a barren family. She never attended an academy. And after entering the university, she was constantly looked down on, not just by students but by teachers as well. There had been countless incidents. To think she could go from that to this. Now she has a club, friends, a place to belong. Effie tells them she truly enjoys spending time here. At that moment, the door slides open. A man steps in and loudly calls them ignorant children. He demands to know what they think they're doing. From the back, Professor Beck remarks to Professor Rin that commoners are wasting university space on pointless activities. These two professors never miss a chance to stir trouble when it comes to commoners. Rin glances at the club's name and calls it ridiculous. He repeats his question, "What are they doing here?" Effie explains that they submitted a proper club proposal and received official approval. Rin scoffs and calls it absurd. He demands to know which fool permitted such a ridiculous club to exist. Then he recognizes Effie, the same student who once had conflict with Sylvia, and calls her a low-life troublemaker. Effie's eyes turn cold as she glares at him. Rin accuses her of arrogance for daring to glare at a respected professor. One of her friends quickly tries to calm her before things escalate further. Professor Beck simply laughs at the scene. Rin says that if she's so confident, she should tell him who granted permission, because as far as he's concerned, no professor would approve something like this. Effie notices someone standing behind Rin. Her eyes widen slightly. Rin assumes she's speechless because she has no response and continues pressing her. Then from behind him, Decluin speaks. It was him. He says he was the one who approved their club and calmly asks if Professor Rin has any objections. Decluin tells Rin that he was the one who permitted the commoners to form a club. He says he could hear the old man calling for him from the other end of the hallway and calmly asks whether he now needs Rin's approval to make decisions. He had come to the university early to escape his nagging sister, only to be greeted by complaints the moment he arrived. And to make matters worse, Rin was drenched in sweat, something Decluin, with his near-obsessive dislike of germs, could barely tolerate. Rin quickly backtracks, saying Decluin misunderstood. He claims he only thought the room looked too empty and wanted to help the students by improving their equipment and furniture. He even offers to take full responsibility for upgrading the club room. Decluin agrees. Rin lets out a stiff, nervous laugh. As he leaves, Decluin glances at Beck and remarks that those who resemble cockroaches tend to act like them too, then excuses himself. In his classroom, students whisper that it's been a while since Decluin's last lecture. Some murmur about the train incident at Burke, about how he supposedly lifted an entire train. Decluin silences the room and begins. Today's topic is pure magic and magic interference, the act of disrupting another mage's spell. He says they will begin with a practical exercise before diving into theory. Right then, Alan enters carrying a box of mana stones. With a snap of Decluin's fingers, the stones rise into the air and shoot toward the students, one hovering before each of them. He tells them each stone costs 3,000 elni. He will cast nothing but telekinesis on them. If they manage to interfere with his telekinesis and seize a stone, they can keep it. The moment Effie hears the price, she blurts out that she agrees to the terms. Her friend Julia hurriedly covers her mouth. Decluin finds her outburst irritating but continues explaining the process, instructing everyone to try. The classroom falls silent. Though it appears to be a lesson, Decluin is testing something else, how well his telekinesis can withstand interference from 150 mages at once. And among them are even archmage candidates. Effie thinks about how her scholarship funds are nearly gone. This mana stone couldn't have appeared at a better time. Sylvia glances at Effine, recalling how Decluin once said Effine discovered her own weakness. She decides she won't lose to her. Some students begin to bleed from their noses. Others tremble under the strain. Alan watches in awe, saying it's incredible that Decluin hasn't faltered despite 150 mages attempting to disrupt his magic. Even Decluin is surprised they haven't managed to do anything for so long. Then he feels it. One stone slips free from his control. It's Sylvia. She quickly looks toward Effine, who is still struggling to break through, and smiles faintly. Decluin congratulates Sylvia for being first. She simply nods, hiding her joy. Decluin scans the room to see if anyone else is close. Then he notes that one more person has succeeded. Sylvia looks up, startled. It's Effine securing her 3,000 elni. Sylvia clenches her teeth. None of the other students manage to break through Decluin's telekinesis. Seeing them push themselves to the brink, he tells them to stop. He calls them pathetic and orders them to take a break and clean up the mess they've made. During the break, Julia asks Effine how she managed to succeed. Effine says she nearly collapsed trying, but then something clicked. Even though she doesn't fully understand telekinesis, when she forced her way through Decluin's magic, it felt like she snapped something. Sylvia listens quietly. She can't understand how someone who ranked last in the previous exam managed to place second here. Were the rumors true that Decluin had been privately teaching Effine and staying late because of her? Did he lie to her? What could he possibly see in someone like Effine? She mutters that Effine is arrogant. After the break, Decluin acknowledges that they all gave it their best effort. However, he tells them there was a simpler way to disrupt his telekinesis. Those who succeeded may have already sensed it, the method of mana interference, rather than traditional magic interference. Unlike the common approach, mana interference requires a deep understanding of the opponent's spell. However, since it won't work on magic you don't personally understand, it isn't widely used, nor is it recommended for most mages to learn. Decluin tells them there is no gain without pain. Now he says he will teach them the core method, the crux, how to identify an opponent's magic circle simply by observing the central circuit. He explains that he will go through nearly every magic circle in existence, one by one. As he lists each type of magic, he casts its circle in the air, forming them seamlessly as he speaks. 2 hours pass. Then suddenly he stops. Since they wasted his time earlier by failing to complete the practical promptly, he says they can study the remaining material on their own. Without waiting for a response, he turns and leaves. The moment he exits, the classroom erupts. Students complain, asking why he would leave midway and how they're supposed to figure out the rest themselves. Effine, however, is still satisfied that she managed to break through Decluin's magic earlier. Just then, someone calls her name from behind. It's Beck. Julia immediately steps forward, asking if he's starting again, if he's itching to pick a fight for no reason. Beck says they've been showing off too much for mere commoners. He demands to know how Effine jumped from the bottom of the rankings to second place. Effine shrugs and says someone like him wouldn't understand even if she explained. Beck sneers and asks whether she bribed Decluin with her body since she has nothing else to offer. Effine's gaze sharpens. She asks what he means. Beck says everyone knows she's been receiving private lessons from Professor Decluin. She denies it outright. Beck presses on, asking how a halfwit who never even attended an academy could improve so suddenly. He suggests Decluin went easy on her, handing her the mana stone as a gift. A green aura flickers around Effine. She tells him to keep talking if he wants his jaw hanging loose. Beck scoffs and asks if she thinks he'll back down. She tells him to try. Just before things escalate, Julia tugs on Effine's sleeve and urges her to step outside. She doesn't want Effine punished again. Effine recalls Decluin's words, "Don't lose your cool over simple provocations." She takes a deep breath, then she smiles and thanks Julia. She says she was wrong to even attempt a conversation with an idiot. Julia tells her it's fine. They leave for the cafeteria. Sylvia, who witnessed everything, is quietly surprised that Effine didn't fall for the bait. Later that day, Effine stomps her foot and clenches her fists, muttering that she only held back because of Julia. If she sees Beck again, she's not sure she can restrain herself. As she turns a corner, she runs into someone familiar. Sylvia. Sylvia asks if they can talk. Effine narrows her eyes and asks if Sylvia is here to pick a fight too. Without hesitation, Sylvia asks if Effine has been receiving tutoring from Decluin. Effine nearly explodes, asking how that makes any sense when she and Decluin barely get along. She demands to know why everyone is suddenly targeting her. Sylvia tells her to keep her secrets, which only makes Effine more irritated. Then Sylvia mentions that Decluin hadn't stepped into his laboratory for over 3 years, not since Effine's father passed away. Effine lets out a dry laugh and says that's only natural. Without her father, a genius, Decluin couldn't accomplish anything. Sylvia then asks if Effine knows that Decluin has been visiting the lab every single day for the past 3 months. He cleaned it. He selected an assistant. He even brought in new magical equipment. Sylvia asks if Effine understands what that implies. Effine's thoughts darken. Is Decluin planning to exploit her father's research again? But in her mind, Decluin isn't capable of continuing that work on his own. She clenches her fists and says she doesn't know what he's planning and that it has nothing to do with her. Sylvia exhales softly, almost in relief. She says she only wanted to inform Effie about the lab, then leaves. Several days later, during the next lecture, the students gather in a strange location. Julia looks around, wondering what they're doing here. Suddenly, Beck rushes past her, deliberately bumping her shoulder. This time, Effie holds Julia back, telling her to be the bigger person. Decluin steps forward and silences the crowd. He announces that this will be their final practical before exams. Then he snaps his fingers. Massive curtains drop. Behind them, a large audience is revealed. Decluin explains that they will be demonstrating magic combat in front of all the spectators. The rules are simple. Each participant must use at least 3 forms of elemental magic. Winning or losing doesn't matter. The evaluation will focus on the quality of the fight itself. Decluin adds that Professor Rin will supervise every match to prevent serious injuries. Other than that, there are no restrictions. As soon as he finishes explaining, he calls a student to the center and tells them to choose an opponent. The student makes a choice. Decluin signals the start. The matches unfold smoothly. While the students fight, Rin ensures no one gets seriously hurt, and Beck records each participant's strengths and weaknesses. The first few battles are awkward. Most of them lack real combat experience, but gradually they adapt. They begin focusing on their magic instead of their nerves. Then, with a thunderous explosion, Sylvia defeats her opponent. Beck sneers that the commoners keep losing to Sylvia and says they belong in gardens as cleaners, not at the university. Effie clenches her jaw. These cruel idiots wouldn't last a second against Sylvia themselves, yet they talk so loudly. She congratulates her friend on a great performance. Next, Decluin calls Beck to the center and tells him to choose his opponent. Beck smirks and chooses Effie. She thinks it's for the better. As soon as she steps into the ring, Beck starts mocking her again. He says there won't be anyone secretly tutoring her inside the arena. Effie asks if constant talking is Beck's idea of basic manners. She says he looks ridiculous trying to copy Decluin's style. Then she casts her magic and declares she'll prove his magic is just as lame as he is. Beck charges at her, saying he'll help her reunite with her parents. It looks like Effie is struck by his spell. Beck celebrates, but then the ground beneath him shifts. Effie stands unharmed. With a clenched magical fist, she launches Beck into the air. He crashes down, crying on the ground. Effie looks at him and asks how it feels to be crushed by a commoner. Decluin comments that it's disappointing the fights ended so quickly. The spectators they invited didn't even get a proper show. Effie raises her hand and asks for another chance. She points out that the rules required 3 types of elemental magic, but her opponent was too weak, she only needed 1. Decluin considers it, then he nods and says she's right. He tells her to choose anyone as her next opponent. Effie lifts her hand and points straight at him. She says she wants to fight Decluin. Rin blurts out, asking if she's lost her mind. The other students stare at her as if she's insane. She expected resistance. But this is the opportunity she has longed for. Decluin smiles faintly at her request. Rin continues ranting about how reckless she is, but Decluin stops him and tells him to compose himself. After all, he did say she could choose anyone. However, he adds that as her professor, they cannot fight on equal terms. He offers a condition. He won't attack first, and if she can make him move from where he stands, he will admit defeat. Effie accepts immediately. This is the moment she has been waiting for. As soon as he tells her to begin, she attacks. She knows she isn't his equal, but she wants to measure the distance between them. Her first spell is blocked. Without hesitation, she follows with the flowing fire magic Decluin once taught in class. Flames engulf him, she doesn't stop. She layers earth magic over it, locking him in place. If he tries to escape, he'll lose his footing. Rin and the students stare in disbelief, but then the earth begins to crack. The flames fade. Decluin stands there completely unharmed. Frustration flashes across Effie's face. She unleashes a barrage of magic projectiles. They vanish before reaching him. He's interfering with her spells. She prepares another cast. This time nothing happens. Her magic fails entirely. Did she make a mistake in her circuit? Decluin calmly tells her that she won't be able to use magic in front of him anymore. That's when she understands. He has completely disabled her ability to cast. But then she decides to switch to magic combat instead, rushing at him since she's always been more confident in close quarters anyway. Decluin calmly lifts a hand and flicks her forehead, and the light tap sends her flying all the way to the other side of the arena. Even Decluin wasn't expecting her to be launched that far from a simple flick. He begins evaluating the strategies she used. Her magic sense was exceptional, and she could wield any element as long as she wore the bracelet she possessed. He can't help but think that the old Decluin would have been jealous of her talent if he had seen her. He walks up to her and tells her she has lost, though the fight wasn't bad. Effie is stunned. He turns and walks away, announcing that the public practical has ended and that everyone should prepare for their upcoming exams. The students are surprised that Decluin openly acknowledged someone, and at the same time, they all agree that Effie performed incredibly well. Beck meanwhile catches stray glances from everyone since his fight is now widely considered the real snooze fest. Effie asks if she was just acknowledged. Her friends rush over, telling her how proud they are of her. Meanwhile, at the port, Gainsa waits for a ship to dock. As soon as it arrives, she steps forward to greet the passengers disembarking. Among them is a girl who greets Gainsa, and Gainsa teasingly asks if Lee didn't miss her. The girl replies that she missed Gainsa, maybe just a little. It's Uriel, the island girl who Yuara, Woojin's ex-girlfriend, once possessed. Gainsa pulls Yura into a tight hug and says she missed Yuria very, very much. Yura complains that Gainsa is hugging her too tightly, and Gainsa quickly loosens her grip, apologizing. On the day Woojin was struck by that blinding light, Yuara was hit as well and woke up in a forest. In front of her, Gainsa and her lackeys were arguing, saying they couldn't possibly kidnap a child. One of the lackeys asks why she folds so easily to handsome men's requests, like Decluin-s. Gainsa approaches Yura and asks if she is Ria. Confused, Yuara looks around. After a moment, she realizes she's inside the very game they had been developing. She decides to play along and says her name is Yura, and that's how she ends up under Gainsa's care. Gainsa calls out to the kids, telling them to stop running. Yuria stares at Gainsa, one of the strongest adventurers in this world. Yura knows that staying close to Gainsa is the safest and easiest way to survive, and maybe even find a way back. Back at Decluin's manor, he opens the box containing the wand he commissioned. It looks beautiful, a wand crafted for Uklin's wielder. Now that he sees its quality, the 9 million elm price tag feels like a bargain, even though he initially thought he was being ripped off. From behind the door, Leroy calls out that dinner is ready. At the table, lavish dishes are spread across the surface. After studying the spread for a moment, Decluin reminds his sister that she claimed the family finances were struggling, yet now they're dining on a feast far grander than usual. She replies that they'll need the energy to overcome what lies ahead. Butler Roy explains that it's all thanks to the antiques Decluin had them sell. The bids climbed so high they nearly caused trouble for the auction house. Roy and his sister were in tears when they saw the final prices, realizing they now have enough money to ignore financial worries for years. Roy adds that Decluin's sister is simply too shy to admit it, and that this meal is her token of gratitude to him. Decluin says he could get used to such lavish food and nods, saying he agrees. Then he casually points out that his sister is holding her knife incorrectly, and she immediately becomes flustered. Later in his office, as he goes through old documents, Decluin grows increasingly disappointed in his former self. He has to put in extra effort to prepare the upcoming exam questions, because when he reviews past papers, they're filled with impossibly difficult problems. Every question reeks of arrogance. He can't believe how wretched the old Decluin's personality was. Perhaps he mistook exams for an opportunity to flaunt his own superiority. Woojin wants to create only good questions, questions with a challenging process, questions that bloom into pride once solved, questions that spark true understanding in young mages. There's one last box of old exam papers left. The moment he glances at it, he notices something different. After reading just a few lines, he knows this isn't something the old Decluin could have written. The difficulty is still high, but the questions ignite genuine interest. With his comprehension skill, he can understand any problem. When he infuses his solution into the magic exam paper, it radiates beams of different colored light. The lights merge, forming the silhouette of a woman in a white dress with long white hair. Decluin is impressed. This question, he decides, must be on the exam. He could feel a sharp sting of jealousy rising from Decluin's body. Woojin was certain that Decluin understood just how perfect this question was, a level of refinement he could never have achieved with his own talent. Decluin then wonders who the woman in the silhouette is. She looks strangely familiar. At the dean's office, a letter arrives, notifying that the matter of the blood shrouds will be discussed at the next meeting. The seal stamped on it belongs to High Elder Destin himself. The dean finds it intriguing that the outcome has stirred such strong resistance from the blood shrouds against their suppression. She remarks that it was quite unexpected, addressing the gathered professors. Adeline, the chairwoman and dean of the Magic Tower and the Imperial University, is a mage renowned for her overwhelming magical prowess and the strongest candidate for the archmage position. Yet despite all her titles, she is surprisingly easygoing. While students gossip about how Decluin and Julie supposedly fought, or how Professor Rin once again failed his diet in record time, she is often listening quietly from a corner. Her curiosity about worldly affairs and her love of gossip stem from a hidden truth about her origins. She is half fairy, and her immense magical power is rooted in the extraordinary mana of the Fae. Though she never shows it openly, she always looks forward to these monthly meetings, when all the professors gather before her. Putting on her dignified expression, she comments that it is quite interesting how Decluin sided with the heretics. More often than not, he is the one who ends up in awkward situations. Decluin would usually respond by asking whether she is implying that he, a great Yukon, would act merely to impress others. But with Decluin absent today, one professor mentions that at the recent sorcerers' meeting, someone called Lady Lunia made an appearance. Lunia once competed with Decluin for the position of head professor and was ultimately forced to resign due to his schemes. She is currently believed to be in the kingdom. Adeline asks what could have brought Lunia back to the Empire so suddenly. The professor replies that Lunia has been guaranteed a position. He adds that the Magic Tower would greatly benefit from her return, considering her remarkable achievements in the kingdom. And since Decluan is now siding with the heretics, he subtly implies that perhaps Decluan should be removed from the chief professor position, without stating it outright. Adeline says she will consider it if Lunia truly returns, and the professor's faces brighten instantly. She then reminds them that today is the final deadline to submit their exam questions and urges them to hurry. They scramble out of the room. Left alone, Adeline wonders if Decluan hasn't been acting strange lately. Even the test he submitted is far too well crafted to be something he would have written before. There is no way he created it alone. A small smile forms as she decides to tease Decluan a little. And if Lunia, his longtime rival, truly appears as well, she can hardly contain her excitement for what is about to unfold. A few days later, on the day of the midterm exam, the students are visibly uneasy. Decluan's tests are infamous for being bizarre and unforgiving. Some students even consider giving up before it begins. Alan tries to calm them as he explains the format. The exam will span 10 days, with the final deadline set at midnight on the last Sunday of the academic schedule. Each student will work individually in their assigned room. They are free to leave to attend other exams, eat, or sleep. However, they are strictly forbidden from taking their test papers outside. It is an open book exam. Julia pales. An open book format with 10 full days can only mean one thing: it must be unbelievably difficult. Effine clutches her hair in frustration, wondering why Decluan couldn't simply submit a normal test for once. Alan continues, explaining that Decluan will personally write a letter of recommendation under his title as chief professor for any student who achieves a perfect score. The room erupts into murmurs. A recommendation from the chief professor would be monumental for their future careers as mages. Mages are ranked from rank 1, known as archmages, down to rank 11, which includes debutante students. Advancement requires passing rigorous promotion exams at every stage, and those exams are no joke. But with Decluan's recommendation letter in hand, it would be like holding a wild card, a near guarantee of promotion. Effine thinks that receiving a recommendation letter from her sworn enemy would completely destroy her motivation. But then another thought creeps in. If she actually gets that letter, her progress would skyrocket. And when she finally defeats Decluan one day, she could tell him that if he hadn't given her that recommendation, he wouldn't be crawling at her feet begging for mercy. The image is so satisfying that she decides right then to aim for a perfect score. Julie glances at her, wondering if Effine is okay, especially seeing her laugh like a full-blown villain. 4 days into the exam, Effine is completely lost. 1 hour for the first question, 4 for the next, 10 for the one after that. With every new question, the difficulty spikes even higher. The problems are crafted with terrifying brilliance. Solving them is painfully slow, yet every answer unlocks a realization she has never experienced before. She can't help but wonder if Decluan truly created this. It's agonizing, but she can't stop. The joy of understanding keeps pulling her back in. She promised herself she would earn that letter from him, yet no matter what she tries, she can't crack the next question. Finally, she decides to step outside for a breather. The longer she stays in that room, the more her brain feels like it's tearing apart. Outside, Sylvia lets out a long sigh of relief. After more than 30 hours, she has finally solved one of the toughest questions. She thinks about the recommendation letter too, though her perspective is different. Anyone capable of scoring full marks on Decluan's exam wouldn't fail a promotion test anyway. For her, the letter itself is meaningless, but the perfect score still matters. Each question feels like a key to a unique enlightenment. If she solves them all, she knows she'll grow as a mage. Just then, someone calls her name. It's Effine. Sylvia wonders how far Effine has progressed. When she asks, Effine throws the same question back at her. They both glance away, flustered. Sylvia says she's on question 8. Effine freezes in surprise, asking how Sylvia reached question 8 so quickly. Effine admits she's stuck on question 7. For a brief moment, Sylvia wonders if Effine is lying. Then she decides not to dwell on it and refocuses on her own exam. Effine teases, asking if Sylvia is leaving just because she showed up. Sylvia calmly replies that she has simply finished her break. While the students remain buried in their exams, Decluan senses a massive shift approaching. The Emperor is in critical condition. Emperor Krebin is known for being gentle and mild-mannered. He always sought balance between divine authority and imperial power, and he never enforced hostile policies against the Blood Shrouds. The real issue is who will ascend the throne after him. The next king is one of the most important and most dangerous figures in this world. Safian Yakatura August van Gibran. Under his rule, the entire world is about to change. A week later, on the final day of Decluan's marathon exam, a large number of students have already dropped out. Even so, the gap between lower and higher ranks becomes crystal clear. Regardless of their scores, everyone who endured the exam brags about it as if it were a medal of honor. When it finally ends, instead of celebrating their freedom, the students quietly reflect on what they learned. It's unusual and it draws attention. Even other professors grow curious and ask to see the rumored questions. Out of all the students, only 2 are still attempting question 8. Effine is absolutely determined to solve the final problem. Her desk is buried under empty coffee cups, and she looks like her soul has nearly left her body. Then suddenly, Decluin and Alan notice a room glowing with brilliant gold light. Decluin says someone has solved the final question. He already knows who it must be. He opens the door, steps inside, and closes it behind him. He congratulates her on solving the problem. Sylvia turns around, tears shimmering in her eyes. Around her, radiant colors swirl, each one filled with elemental magic. Even within the cool blues, he can feel a gentle warmth, like starlight shining with hope through darkness. It is a true masterpiece. Just looking at it makes him smile. Even though he created the question, he himself could never manifest such beauty, limited by his own boundaries. He structured the question around himself. Woojin, who once dreamed of becoming an artist, lacked the talent to truly move people with his work, yet he never gave up on that dream. Decluin's own sense of aesthetics was woven into the problem as well. So in a way, both Decluin, who loves beauty, and Woojin, who longed for art school, found comfort in Sylvia's magic. Decluin congratulates her once more, and before leaving he quietly thanks her, leaving Sylvia speechless. She says she wanted to thank him too. Before coming here she had almost lost interest in magic. Her family constantly reminded her that she had to become an archmage and the pressure suffocated her. But she tells him she refused. Magic is already beautiful on its own. She doesn't need to become an archmage to validate it. Later that day, Alan goes to Effine's room to inform her that time is up. Effine forces a smile and says it's a shame. Alan smiles back and tells her she did very well and that only 2 students even dared to attempt the final question. Effine immediately knows the other one was Sylvia and asks if she solved everything. Alan nods. Effine sighs, calling Sylvia a monster, though there's clear jealousy in her voice. Before she realizes it, her obsession with earning a recommendation letter from Decluin has completely faded. All that remains is her curiosity as a mage and her hunger for knowledge. She wants to solve every question. She stands up and decides to keep working on the final problem, even though the exam is already over. Alan wishes her luck and says he'll be cheering for her. As she walks back toward her dorm, exhaustion weighs heavily on her. She feels like she would have been lighter if she had answered every question. Instead, what waits for her is a dorm door covered in graffiti and a cold, lonely bed. She notices shadows approaching. When she looks up, it's Julia and the other commoners. Julia says it's tradition to unwind together after exams by eating something delicious. Effine's eyes begin to well up. Julia snorts and says she looks ridiculous crying, then asks if the exam was really that hard. Then she casually adds that Effine is paying for the food since she made them wait so long. Effine immediately says she refuses. Several days later, Effine finally solves the final question on her own. It even brings tears to her eyes. Just then, Julia knocks and asks if she's ready to head out. They're both excited to finally have a break from assignments and exams. Effine thinks she made the right choice not to give up on that last problem. It was the most profound magical experience she's ever had. Julia suddenly asks if she's heard the news. Effine asks what she means. Julia says it's about Decluin. Ever since his exam questions spread, things have been chaotic. After taking a quick sip of her drink, she explains that Decluin has been summoned to the floating islands. The floating islands hover nearly 1,500 meters above ground. They are home to the mage community, a place said to hold the world's greatest knowledge and magic, an independent zone, untouched by the systems of the empire. Mages who truly dedicate themselves to magic inevitably gather there. Several of them praised Decluin's exam papers, and he quickly became a hot topic among the island's scholars. That's why he was invited to give a special lecture on the solutions to his test. Even Decluin didn't expect the invitation, but the fee offered was far too tempting to refuse. He places the exam papers on the desk, greets the attendees, and introduces himself as a monocrank mage and the chief professor of the Magic University. He announces that the lecture will last 2 hours. Before diving into the questions, he says he wants to explain his theory on pure elements. Adeline leans toward the person beside her and asks if they've seen the questions. The person whispers back that they must be plagiarized, that there's no way Decluin could have created something so incredible. It's Lunia, Decluin's arch-nemesis. The lecture proceeds smoothly. He uses the same structured explanations he once used at the university, guiding the listeners with clarity and precision. The audience listens intently to his systematic, eye-opening breakdown. When he reaches the 6th question, someone interrupts him. It's Adeline. She casually casts a spell and asks what should be combined with the circuit from question 6 to make it as destructive as possible. Decluin sighs inwardly, knowing she's just playing around, likely testing whether the questions are truly his. Deciding to entertain her, he answers flawlessly, resolving her doubt in a way that surprises even her. Unfortunately, that only encourages her. She keeps firing off more and more questions. He answers every single one, demonstrating deep comprehension each time. Eventually, the other mages grow visibly irritated at her constant interruptions, and Adeline finally falls silent. Decluin glances at the time and says that, since he spent so long answering questions, he no longer has time to explain the final one. Just then, another hand rises for one last question. She asks whether Decluin's thoughts on the 8th question are truly his own. It's Lunia. Decluin asks what she means. She replies that as the question is written, she's curious whether he personally conceived and authored question number 8. Murmurs ripple through the hall. Some begin asking if she's accusing him of plagiarism. Decluin answers calmly. Being inspired by ideas that aren't entirely one's own is common in magic. Then, as he casts a rough version of the 8th spell on the spot, he says this one is entirely his. The audience is mesmerized by its beauty. He explains that it differs from the version described in question 8 since this one was created instantly without preparation. Then he turns to Lunia and asks if that answers her question. She says nothing, teeth clenched. Decluin ends the lecture and walks out. He knows Lunia will stir trouble for him soon enough. Sometimes he wonders why he's always surrounded by people eager to tear him down. As he turns a corner, he notices someone waiting. She looks familiar, yet he can't immediately place her. The moment she sees him, her face twists in disgust. He wonders what he did this time, then it clicks. She was one of his peers during his university days. Decluin extends his hand for a handshake. Charlotte responds coldly, saying she doesn't recall them being close enough to address each other so casually. Decluin asks how Princess Maho is doing, which clearly catches Charlotte off guard. He doesn't care whether he was close to Charlotte or not. What matters is Princess Maho, the one Charlotte protects. With the Emperor on the verge of death, the story is approaching a major turning point. Many named figures will soon face life-or-death situations. One of the characters Decluin must save, no matter the cost, is Princess Maho. Woojin modeled her after himself, and she is destined to influence the latter half of the main storyline. Her bloodline is dangerously complex. She is second in line for the throne of the Uran Republic and third in line for the throne of the Leek Kingdom. Wherever she goes, blood and destruction tend to follow. She is currently staying in the Empire under the excuse of studying, but once the Emperor dies and she is forced to leave, her life will be in grave danger. Charlotte says that even after all these years, Decluin still has a talent for forcing cruel words out of people. Decluin hands her a small orb and tells her that, when the time comes, he will be the lifeline that saves her and her comrades. After examining it, she realizes it's a communication crystal. He tells her to contact him once she's decided what to do. She replies that she would never accept help from a mess like him. Decluin says she doesn't have a choice if she intends to keep the princess alive. But if she insists on remaining stubborn and risking the princess's life, then she's free to do as she pleases. He turns and walks away. As Charlotte stands there, torn in thought, a worried voice calls out, asking if she's all right. It's the princess. Charlotte quickly tries to mask her concern, but the princess already senses what's happening and gently tells her not to carry the burden alone. The princess knows her brother's followers will arrive soon, and when they do, they will either try to use her or eliminate her. She admits she's nervous. She fled to the Empire under the excuse of studying. It was peaceful here, safe, almost like a refuge. But the next emperor will not leave her alone. She knows she has to leave, and soon. Charlotte understands. Seeing the worry in her eyes, the princess calls her closer and says the suitcase she's holding contains all the money she has saved up until now. Charlotte asks if she's trying to give it to her. The princess explains that she knows Charlotte is short on funds to hire escort mercenaries for their journey. Charlotte insists she'll find another way. The princess gently tells her not to shoulder everything alone. The money is for all of them and it won't be wasted. After a moment of hesitation, Charlotte agrees. Unbeknownst to them, someone is eavesdropping outside. Charlotte senses it and demands to know who's there, but the figure runs off. The Empire is no longer safe. Accepting Decluin's help may be her last option. Back at Decluin's manor, he's quietly reading when his sister starts pestering him, saying she doesn't remember him ever enjoying books this much. When he doesn't respond, she calls his name and mentions that she heard about his invitation to the floating islands and the generous payment he received for the lecture. Decluin immediately tells Uriel she's not getting any of that money. She scoffs and says she doesn't need it. She only came to deliver an official document from the university. The debutante student mages are requesting permission to enter Ukland territory for a field trip, and she asks him to consider it. He imagines the chaos they might cause. Decluin says those trips always end in disaster, and he won't allow such recklessness under his watch. She tells him to stop being stubborn and reaches into her pocket for the document, but Decluin raises his hand, stopping her. He tells her to leave. When she tries to protest, he gives her a cold, final look. Pouting, she gives up and walks out. Once she's gone, he takes out a communication orb and calls for Charlotte. She answers immediately, saying they have to move quickly. There's no time left. She asks for his help. Decluin tells her to listen carefully to every word he says. When she asks what he means, he uses telekinesis to pull a map toward him. He explains that Princess Maho has only one possible escape route. It's dangerous, but that danger works both ways. Charlotte asks what route. Decluin answers they must cross Crevice Canyon. Charlotte immediately objects. That place is saturated with demonic energy. She says she shouldn't have trusted Decluin of all people. Decluin asks if she can handle all the pursuers alone on the normal route and tells her to trust his judgment. Crevice Canyon is a wasteland of jagged terrain and dense demonic energy. It lies near a demon lair, and sightings have been reported even within its independent borders. Decluin explains that this is the only viable path. Charlotte argues it's still too risky. If they encounter demons, they have no way to deal with them. Decluin reminds her that he is a Uckling and that he will personally guide them through. She's surprised he would go this far. She asks what he stands to gain. Decluin replies that he has an interest in politics, and that he is far more intelligent and perceptive than she gives him credit for. She snaps, asking why he's suddenly insulting her. He calmly says he wants Princess Maho to survive because her future influence will benefit his family and territory. An unspoken agreement. Charlotte asks where they will rendezvous. Decluin tells her to meet him at the canyon entrance in 3 days. If she can't even make it that far on her own, then perhaps she doesn't deserve to survive. Charlotte agrees, hoping his confidence isn't just empty words. 3 days later, in Uckland territory, a large group of university students gathers. Heikin, the state capital of Uckland territory, is a bustling tourist destination known for its vibrant activities and rich food culture. It was designed as an ideal city, modeled after the most beloved urban centers. Because of that, it was often proposed as a field trip destination, and Decluin always rejected it. Uriel asks why he suddenly changed his mind. The reason is simple. Heikin lies only 3 to 4 hours on horseback from Crevice Canyon. When the time comes, he can leave without raising suspicion. Decluin asks what the students are saying. Uriel reports that the university has booked an entire floor at the Heikin Romance Hotel. 4 students per room, unless they choose to pay for private rooms themselves. Decluin does the bare minimum as a supervising professor and gives them a brief tour. He tells them he won't interfere in their fun, but if they damage his hotel or disgrace his territory, he promises to wipe the smiles off their faces for the rest of their university lives. Afterward, he shifts his focus to strengthening Heikin as a strategic outpost. Uriel gathers the skilled mages from the Heikin Magic Tower for evaluation by Decluin, proudly declaring their competence. Decluin easily spots the golden aura surrounding those with true talent. He instructs Uriel to raise the salaries of the gifted ones and dismiss those who have been freeloading. After a long day restructuring Heikin's operations, he arrives at a campfire where the students are tasked with creating fireworks. Sylvia presents hers. The professors praise it as flawless, exactly what they expected. Decluin remains silent. The other 2 professors give her perfect scores. Julia grumbles, asking why they're being assigned work during a trip, and Effine agrees. Effine's team steps forward next. They begin explaining their formula, but Rin cuts them off, saying he's already bored and they should just launch it. They fire it into the sky, where it bursts into vibrant, dazzling colors. Even the students gasp in admiration. Rin gives them 6 points, saying it was too loud. The other professor gives them a 4. Julia starts demanding to know what they did wrong, but Effine stops her. Decluin gives them a 10, stating that the balance between destructive and ductile magic was excellent. Julia beams at the score. Later that night, as Decluin prepares his horse to meet Charlotte, he quietly hopes she managed to reach the canyon safely. Just then, Effine appears and asks if this is because of some kind of debt. Decluin was caught off guard, then asked what she was doing out so late and told her to head back. Effine asked him to explain why he kept helping her, even during the disciplinary hearing in the club room, and even today. She asked if it was because of her father. Decluin mounted his horse and told her to figure it out herself before dashing off. She shouted that she would apply to become one of his subordinates and do whatever it took to expose him. She promised to surpass him and become far greater than him. After he disappeared from sight, she began wiping her tears. Even after saying all that, she didn't feel any death variable. Even Decluin himself didn't know what had truly happened between Effine's father and him before Wujun possessed his body. After a while, he dismounted and sent the horse back to the stable, telling it to return by the next afternoon. He then pulled out his communication orb to contact Kolto. Just then, behind him, they arrived covered in blood. The knight stepped forward, bowed to the princess, introduced himself, and said he would be guiding them through their escape. The princess thanked him. He asked Charlotte if it had been difficult to make it all the way to the cavern, since they looked like a mess. Charlotte handed Decluin a letter and said it was from the adventure team. Decluin read it and muttered that they were disgusting, as if they didn't know their limits. Charlotte asked if they could handle all that themselves. Decluin told her not to worry and motioned for them to keep up with him. As they moved through the caverns, the princess asked what was written in the letter, since Decluin hadn't looked pleased after reading it. Charlotte hesitated, then said there were 37 assassins and Dianes were chasing them. The princess asked what a Diane was. Charlotte explained that they were phantoms, but also demons, which made them immune to most, if not all, physical and magical attacks. Even one of them was a greater threat than all the assassins combined. She added that they were even more vile when born from a contract. The princess asked what she meant. Charlotte explained that to form contracts with demonic beings, mages used materials such as human bodies and demon horns. And those very mages were willing to go that far just to hunt them down. They were also the same people the throne would pass to once the emperor died. Still, Charlotte tried to remain slightly optimistic, since the one guiding them was a yukon from the once famed family of exorcists. As they walked through the canyon, Decluin understood why it was called the Demon's Lair. The others struggled to breathe under the dense demonic energy. But for a yukon, being surrounded by demonic energy only made him stronger. While inside the canyon, his mana quality reached rank 4. To put that into perspective, commoners usually had a mana quality of 9 or 10. If someone's mana quality was above 7, they could attempt to become a mage or a knight. Above rank 5, the number of people with better ranks dropped sharply. Most of the famous named figures possessed rank 3 or 4 mana quality. Rank 1 symbolized a god. And in the entire world, only 4 people held rank 2, the High Elder Desicton of Burke, Empire Guardian Knight Jeddarid, Archmage Deccan, and Chairwoman Adeline. With rank 4 mana, Decluin could easily deal with the Dianes chasing them. Charlotte asked if they weren't moving too slowly. Decluin asked if she had lost her judgment because she was in a rush. He told her the pace he set was optimal to avoid being poisoned by demonic energy. Charlotte glanced back at the princess in worry, but the princess assured her she was fine and asked her not to feel so pressured. Charlotte smiled, touched by how warm the princess's heart was, even while being hunted. Though the princess was more restless and anxious than Charlotte herself, she was still mindful of her subordinates' feelings. Charlotte silently vowed not to let the princess come to harm, even if it cost her life. Suddenly, the princess pointed ahead in panic. A colony of bats rushed straight toward them. Charlotte prepared to strike them down, but Decluin told her to conserve her strength. His wood-steel shurikens sprang into motion. With telekinesis, he controlled a dozen at once and sent them slicing through the air, shredding the bats in a single instant. The escort mercenary remarked that it was only natural for the chief professor to eliminate them all in one attack. Even the princess agreed. A little deeper into the canyon, they found themselves in constant clashes with lesser demons. The mercenary said he was at least relieved they hadn't run into the phantom demons they had feared. Just then, Decluin coldly warned someone that he would tear their limbs off if they took another step closer. The others exchanged confused looks, unsure who he was speaking to. A mysterious figure revealed himself. He praised Decluin's instincts, mocking him as someone about to die. Behind him, a large wave of enemies emerged from the shadows. The moment Decluin saw their numbers, he told Charlotte to take the princess and move ahead immediately. Charlotte tried to protest, but Decluin asked if she was pretending to worry about him, saying it wasn't necessary. Even now, his sharp tongue caught her off guard. Decluin raised his wand toward the assassins and told Charlotte to watch closely. The instant he pointed, an explosion erupted beneath the group. Most of the assassins were killed on the spot. Decluin said he was more than capable of handling them and told Charlotte to focus on her duty and leave as fast as possible. Charlotte finally moved to escort the princess, but the princess suddenly pointed behind them. When Charlotte turned, a shadowy figure appeared with even more assassins. She recognized it at once, a Diane. Decluin calmly said the plan hadn't changed and ordered Charlotte to go. She insisted he couldn't handle all this alone. Decluin replied that he was going to kill the demon. The hired mercenary also chose to stay behind and help, urging the 2 women to leave. Decluin told Charlotte there was no need to hesitate and offered to send several of his wood-steel shurikens to guard and escort them. Gritting her teeth, Charlotte dragged the princess away, telling Decluin and the mercenary to make it safely to the Urin Republic. Several assassins gave chase, and the demon phantom laughed, wondering how far the 2 ladies could possibly run. Decluin told it to worry about itself. The creature sneered and called Decluin arrogant, boasting that it was virtually immortal to magic and physical attacks. Decluin thought it was far too overconfident. What it didn't know was that he held the greater advantage. His mana quality had been greatly amplified, and his mana recovery rate had risen dramatically. On top of that, he could endlessly channel his mightiest touch into his wood-steel shurikens. As the demon continued bragging, one of Decluin's shurikens flanked it. Seizing the opening, he launched it straight into the demon. The creature didn't bother to dodge, convinced of its own immortality, but Decluin followed with a relentless barrage. For the first time, the demon looked shocked. It had taken damage. Its body began trying to regenerate desperately. The mercenary muttered that the demon had already been torn into pieces. Decluin warned him not to lower his guard. It wouldn't be over until they shredded it into fragments so small it couldn't realistically regenerate. He unleashed all his shurikens at once, driving them into the half-formed body again and again, cutting it apart each time it tried to reform. The mercenary could hardly believe what he was seeing. Meanwhile, Charlotte eliminated the last of the assassins chasing them. The princess suddenly dropped to her knees, and Charlotte rushed to support her. The princess assured her she only felt slightly nauseous from the demonic energy. Charlotte explained it was a symptom of demonic energy poisoning, but since they had already left the canyon, she should recover soon. Just then, a voice called out to the princess. It was her uncle, the Minister of Internal Affairs, Giant. He apologized for not being able to come for her personally. The princess thanked him for coming this far. He then turned to Charlotte, who introduced herself as the princess's escort. Giant expressed his gratitude for keeping his niece safe on her own. Charlotte replied that others had helped them as well. She glanced back toward the canyon and asked if they could wait for the rest. Even after the sun had set, Decluin and the mercenary had not appeared. The princess quietly wondered if they were all right. Charlotte thanked Decluin in her heart for his noble sacrifice in protecting the princess. The minister said they needed to depart soon, as they were about to enter the territory of the Uran Republic. Then they spotted two silhouettes approaching. Decluin's voice carried across the distance, saying he was glad the princess had made it safely. Charlotte and the princess ran toward them. Decluin said he was heading back immediately. Charlotte asked him to at least take a short break. Decluin replied there was no need and told them to wait to hear from Butler Ron. As he walked away, Charlotte thought back to how she had first assumed he was trying to pick a fight with her. In the end, he had put his life on the line and truly helped both her and the princess. He had even placed himself in danger so they could escape first. She realized she needed to thank him. She called out to him, extending her hand, and thanked him with a smile. Decluin said it was fine, then glanced at her appearance and remarked that she hadn't even washed up, adding that he had no intention of touching her dirty hand. Charlotte clenched her fist, thinking she shouldn't have thanked him at all. As he continued walking away, she called out once more, telling him to take care and promising to repay him someday. The princess also thanked him from behind. Decluin simply waved as he left. Later that evening, Charlotte entered the minister's office. The minister asked her to sit. Charlotte wondered what he wanted to discuss. Was he going to say that the Uran Republic wouldn't take them in either, or did he have some hidden agenda? She quickly cleared her thoughts, deciding that if he meant them harm, he would have acted the moment he saw them. The minister asked her not to be shocked by what he was about to say and to listen until the end. He revealed that the Grand Duke wanted Princess Maho to support him. Charlotte was stunned. After a moment of silence, she asked what he meant. Was he saying the princess could become the Grand Duchess? The minister confirmed it. He said the Grand Duke had intended this even before the princess had sent her letter. He added that the Duke appeared unable to trust his own grandson. This information was highly confidential. Only the Grand Duke, the minister, and Charlotte knew. Charlotte wondered if this was even possible. Not long ago, she had feared the princess would die in the succession struggle. Yet the pitiful princess, who seemed to possess nothing, could become the Grand Duke's heir the moment she placed herself under the dukedom's protection. How could things change so quickly? A thought suddenly flashed through her mind. Wasn't there one more person who knew? The minister said no, there was no one else. He had heard this directly from the Grand Duke himself. Charlotte nodded, saying she understood. She remembered Decluin claiming he was helping the princess survive purely so his family and territory could benefit. He had also asked her to have the princess lend support to the Ukline family later, almost as if he had known this would happen. He had boasted that he was highly political, more intelligent and perceptive than Charlotte herself. Had he calculated all of this in advance? She thought he was a monster for that. Then she smiled faintly, wondering if he had returned safely. The next morning at the Ukline estate, Decluin woke up, unsure if he had even slept 2 hours. The sun had not yet risen. The Iron Man trait he possessed melted away his exhaustion with only a brief rest. Though the previous day had been far from ordinary, his refreshed body forced him awake. He immediately began training his telekinesis. As he trained, he wondered if he should have started this much earlier. Since arriving in this world, he had trained every morning the moment he woke up. He identified his weaknesses and worked on them tirelessly, growing stronger without pause because danger lurked everywhere. Such routines were possible because it was Decluin, but that alone wasn't the full explanation. His disciplined habits, competitive nature, and strong mentality were what truly allowed him to live with purpose. He thought it would have been nice if he had been like this back on Earth. If he had lived this way as Woojin, maybe his girlfriend wouldn't have left him. Then he muttered that it would also be nice to sleep a little longer. The Iron Man trait was acting up again. Being awake for 22 hours a day was exhausting for someone trapped inside a game. At the train station that day, students were chatting about how unfortunate it was that they had to leave the Ukline territory so early. Ganesha commented that there were far too many mages around the station. Her lackey explained that the debutante mages from the university were returning from their trip to Hidecane. Yulia asked why they were hiding. Ganesha laughed nervously and said they were simply staying out of everyone's way because it was crowded, insisting they weren't hiding at all. Yulia said it still seemed suspicious. Ganesha glanced back. In truth, she was hiding from Decluin. Whether he had changed recently or not didn't matter. Nothing good would come from him seeing her with the person involved in her last request. And yet she couldn't deny that he was far too handsome. Watching him from a distance like this was the only way she could manage it. Yulia stepped out of the alley, saying the crowd didn't matter and that it was better than being squished in such a cramped space. Ganesha unconsciously called her name a little too loudly, drawing Decluan's attention. He turned toward them. Ganesha felt her stomach drop. They were finished. Then she noticed Yulia wasn't moving. She asked what was wrong. Yulia was staring at Decluan. Suddenly, memories of Woojin surfaced in her mind, and tears welled up in her eyes. She wondered why these thoughts were coming back so suddenly. Decluan was just a character from a game. So why did she feel this strange sense of longing as she wiped away her tears? At the same time, Decluan found himself thinking that Yulia looked remarkably similar to Yuara. They both realized they had been staring and quickly looked away. Decluan thought he had been imagining something ridiculous again. Yulia also turned her gaze aside and walked back, stretching as if nothing had happened. Decluan addressed the students who were eating snacks, warning them that he would deduct points if they kept walking around and leaving crumbs in his territory. Ganesha noticed that Decluan had clearly seen Yulia, yet he said nothing. She wondered if he had truly changed. Several days later, inside a carriage, Uriel trembled like a drenched puppy. Decluan told her to calm down. Uriel protested, saying they were on their way to meet the new emperor, and it would be strange if she weren't nervous. Decluan replied that all they needed to do was bow their heads during the coronation. They weren't even having a personal audience, so she should stop being dramatic. He then handed something to his sister. It was an analysis he had compiled after reviewing various conditions, including the new emperor's temperament. He told Uriel to consider it carefully when managing the territory. 12 days ago, Krebame, the previous emperor, had passed away. Once the new emperor was crowned, the main quest would begin progressing much faster. Because of that, Decluan had started documenting key events. If Uriel followed his notes properly, she would be able to reduce the difficulty of future quests. Uriel asked if Decluan had suddenly become a fortune teller. Decluan responded that he would personally check her work to ensure she followed it. When they arrived at the palace, a guard guided them to their designated area. On the way, they crossed paths with Julie, who looked at them with a sleepy expression. They simply nodded at each other. Decluan thought that Julie still seemed troubled over the Veron issue. As they reached their place, a lavish carriage pulled up. Everyone knelt. A lady stepped out and walked past them toward the throne. A priest stood waiting with the crown. The crown was placed upon the new emperor's head. Drums thundered, and the cheers of citizens who had gathered to greet their ruler echoed through the air. And just like that, a new emperor was born. Emperor Sofian Yekatera August von Jibrine. She yawned. Uriel whispered that the emperor was yawning. Despite holding unmatched influence, she was always bored. The reason lay in her character design. Within the game, she possessed the greatest talent. If she chose to become a knight, she would rise as a guardian knight. If she chose the path of a mage, she would become an archmage. Her talent in every field was overwhelming. And precisely because of that, nothing interested her. As Decluan was thinking about her, she suddenly felt someone staring. He looked around, trying to see who it was. His gaze slowly lifted to the new emperor. Uriel murmured that the emperor was surveying the nobles and had been glancing in their direction for a while. Decluan lowered his head again, certain she had been staring at him. He wondered why. The emperor muttered that the ceremony was utterly boring. She had half expected an ambush or a bombing, glancing toward Charon, her personal guard. She added that at least one person had piqued her interest. A scholar had suggested she try something new. Even Charon had mentioned that a certain question had caused an uproar, despite being meant only for debutante mages. She said she had seen the creator of that question today, which was why she had been looking at him. Though it was their first meeting, it felt as if he knew her quite well. Charon replied that everyone knew her. She shook her head. Decluan was different. She couldn't fully explain it, but it felt like he was sizing her up. His eyes hadn't wavered even after realizing she was staring at him. She laughed softly, saying it felt almost like meeting an old friend. Then she stood, remarking that she should at least tend to her duties now that she had become emperor. She mentioned getting rid of the unwritten rules that had been passed down for generations. She was referring to the emperor's classes at the university. As they walked back toward their classes, Decluan commented that the students were just as foolish as ever, even after the new term had begun. When they reached the office, they saw a crowd gathered in front of the door. Inside, guards bearing the imperial crest were waiting at his desk. Decluan wondered what they wanted from him. Charon stepped forward and announced that there was a letter from the palace for Decluan, instructing him to show the utmost respect. Decluan immediately knelt. Charon declared that the imperial family intended to grant the head of the Eucline family and senior professor of the magic tower, Decluan, the honor of sharing and discussing magic with Her Majesty the Emperor. Professor Decluan had been included among the candidates for selection as the instructional mage who would personally teach Her Majesty. To prove his ability, he was to solve a question created by the palace mage George. Decluan wondered why the emperor had chosen him. In the Empire, there was a tradition where, for 1 year after ascending the throne, the emperor would learn about the world from external personnel. Knights, mages, and scholars selected through their respective examinations would conduct the lessons. Decluan thought there had never been a storyline where he was chosen like this. His interest was piqued. Normally, he wouldn't have paid it much attention, but if an event like this fell into his lap, there was no reason to refuse. Quests connected to the imperial family always came with incredible rewards. On top of that, he might discover why Safian had her eyes on him. Charon asked if Decluin would accept the challenge, adding that he could forfeit if he believed his skills were insufficient. Decluin said he accepted. Charon handed him the question and prepared to leave. The scholar had told Charon that the problem should torment any mage for at least 3 days. All candidates had to solve it to qualify as an instructor. Charon recalled that His Excellency Lord George had declared the question exceptionally difficult. He wondered how long the much-rumored Decluin would take. Before they even exited the room, the question began to glow. The Imperial Court Mage George appeared on the scroll, congratulating Decluin for solving the problem. He explained that candidates were judged based on the time taken, and solving it within a day was already considered fast. The Imperial Knight stared in disbelief. Decluin had already solved it. Decluin said it was far from easy and that he had only managed because he had recently been researching rune language. He added that he was simply fortunate. The knights called him brilliant. Decluin, however, knew the truth. The rune language used in the problem was a difficult script found only in ancient texts. For others, it would be nearly impossible. But he had refined the rune language font himself back when he was a game designer. Though it had been long ago, with his memory and comprehension traits, a problem of this level was trivial. He turned to Charon, who handed him an official invitation from the imperial family. Since he had qualified, he would be moving forward. Decluin thanked him. Charon later reported to the emperor that Decluin had solved the problem in less than 5 minutes. She said there was nothing more to consider and ordered that they proceed with him for the position. Charon suggested it would still be better to observe a little longer. The emperor asked what more there was to observe. Solving a problem George had sworn was difficult in 5 minutes was more than enough proof. She sighed and remarked that Charon seemed to favor a woman named Luina over Decluin. Luina had taken over 4 hours to solve the same problem. 4 hours would have been considered excellent had no one solved it in 5 minutes, but the results were clear. Charon explained that his inclination toward Mage Luina wasn't personal bias. There were simply too many rumors surrounding Professor Decluin. A more flawless mage might be better suited for admission into the Imperial Palace. The Emperor told him not to speak of rumors in her presence. She believed only what she saw with her own eyes. She had decided on Decluin as the instructional mage and told Charon not to press further. Charon bowed, saying he understood. She then asked whether Rujidin, who was supposed to oversee the instructional night examination, had been injured. Charon confirmed that Vice Captain Isaac was on medical leave. She asked if that was why there had been no news regarding the night selection. Was there any other suitable candidate? Charon replied that they were currently searching. The Emperor said she had a better idea and ordered him to carry it out at once. Charon looked uneasy about what she was about to command. At the Knights' Order of Freheim, Julie was training. The other knights wondered if their captain was pushing herself too hard. Her complexion still looked pale. One of them said at least she was holding her sword now, because before, she looked like she might collapse at any moment. Another remarked that the only thing that might lift her spirits would be news that Veron's body had been found. Suddenly, a knight came running toward her, calling her name. He rushed up and whispered something that left her stunned. Later, Charon read out a similar letter to her. She had been selected as a candidate for the role of instructional knight and was required to pass an examination to prove her ability. Julie accepted and headed to the test location. When she entered the cabin, someone greeted her in a familiar tone. 3 other candidates were already waiting. Julie said it had been a while since she had seen her seniors. One of them said he had a feeling she would be chosen and told her to take a seat. He wondered what the exam would be like, adding that being gathered like this felt like a group project back in their academy days. Gwen of the Sacred Star Knights said she wouldn't go easy on anyone and told Julie to be prepared. Rayful of the Knights of Vigor remarked that it went without saying they were all there for the same goal. The room fell silent. Their attention shifted to an empty seat. Someone suggested it was reserved for the examiner, though he seemed rather late. Gwen mentioned she had heard that Vice Captain Isaac, who was supposed to examine them, was resting due to injury. Rayful said he wasn't sure who would be replacing him. Just then, the door opened behind them. When the person stepped inside, Julie froze in shock. Decluin greeted them calmly, introducing himself as the acting examiner for the instructional night selection. Not just Julie, all of them looked surprised. Julie wondered why a mage had come to oversee a knight's examination, and more importantly, what was he plotting this time? The knights were left speechless by his arrival. One of them immediately shot to his feet, angrily questioning how someone who knew nothing about a knight's responsibilities could possibly judge them. Decluin, however, couldn't have looked less concerned. He simply took a seat and let out a quiet sigh. Since he wasn't a knight, he explained, he would be conducting the examination exactly according to the official guidelines he had been given. Whether they liked it or not, he had been appointed as the Imperial Palace's instructional mage. That alone made him qualified. and if anyone wished to challenge that decision, they would effectively be challenging the Emperor herself. That revelation hit the room like a second bombshell. Without wasting time, the blonde knight stepped forward and raised the question everyone was thinking. Could Deucalion guarantee fairness? Would he truly judge everyone equally, or would certain individuals receive special treatment? The target of that question was obvious. Julie. Remaining completely composed, Deucalion explained that he was merely the examiner. The final decision belonged to the Emperor, not him. They had no reason to worry. With that settled, he instructed everyone to get some rest because the examination would begin the following day. As the candidates headed upstairs, whispers immediately spread through the group. Doubts still lingered, but at least they found some comfort in knowing the Emperor would have the final word. Meanwhile, Deucalion remained seated alone. His thoughts were far from calm. The candidates were right about one thing: this test would never be fair, just not for the reason they imagined. No matter what happened, Julie was going to fail. Hours later, Deucalion stood by the window of his quarters. Outside, beneath the endless snowfall, the four knight candidates continued sparring tirelessly. Despite the harsh weather, none of them appeared exhausted. Julie in particular seemed more determined than ever. Watching her stirred something uncomfortable inside him. The reason he had accepted this absurd role in the first place had always been Julie. A mage with almost no practical swordsmanship knowledge had no business selecting knights, yet he accepted anyway, because Julie absolutely could not enter the palace. Not yet. Deep beneath the palace rested one of the greatest threats tied to Deucalion's fate, the mirror, a deadly variable hidden within Freyden's abyss. Until that thing was destroyed, Julie stepping into the palace could trigger consequences far beyond anyone's imagination. The following day, the first examination began. All candidates gathered at the designated location as Deucalion explained the challenge. The test would measure observation, judgment, and persistence. Scattered throughout the examination area were rare magical fruits. Each candidate would receive a different target. Their task was simple: locate the assigned fruit and return it. Extending his hand, Deucalion projected the image of each target fruit before the knights. Then came the condition. The fruit had to be returned in absolutely perfect condition. Even the slightest damage would result in failure. There was one more rule. Throughout the entire examination, Deucalion would not leave his seat. After laying out the conditions, he asked if anyone had objections. This was their first chance to protest, and their last. The candidates exchanged glances but remained silent. Nobody spoke. Satisfied, Deucalion immediately declared the start of the test. Far away in the frozen wilderness, Julie battled against a relentless blizzard. Her assigned target was the ice flower, a transparent flower that grew high upon icy cliffs deep within snowy mountains. Harvesting one was notoriously difficult. Fortunately, 10 of them bloomed and withered each day, making the challenge difficult but not impossible. As she pushed through the storm, another thought kept distracting her. Had Deucalion truly come here only because the Emperor ordered him to? Eventually, her eyes caught a faint glow. There it was. The ice flower. Without hesitation, she climbed the cliff, harvested it, and rushed back to the cabin. Presenting it confidently, she waited for Deucalion's judgment. He examined it silently, then spoke. It was damaged. Julie froze. Deucalion pointed toward an almost invisible crack on one of the petals. Disappointment hit her immediately. She blamed herself for overlooking such a tiny flaw, but her determination remained intact. She turned around and headed back out. Another climb, another flower. This time she nearly slipped from the cliff entirely while retrieving it, yet after returning she received the exact same answer. Damaged? Even the blonde knight sitting nearby struggled to believe it. After everything she had gone through, another defective flower. Hours passed. Hunger began gnawing at Julie's stomach. It certainly didn't help that the blonde knight was casually eating nearby. Almost as though he had anticipated her thoughts, Deucalion calmly reminded everyone of the rules. Food would only be provided after completing the examination, or after forfeiting. With a serious expression, he asked Julie whether she intended to give up. The answer wasn't even close. She immediately marched back into the storm. By now, the cold was becoming unbearable. Her coat had protected her for a while, but exhaustion was steadily catching up. Every step demanded more effort than the last. Time was running out. Eventually, she spotted another faint glow atop a distant cliff. Pushing herself to the limit, she secured yet another ice flower and returned. Once again, Deucalion delivered the same verdict. Damaged, no emotion, no hesitation. His voice felt colder than the blizzard raging outside. At this point, Julie was reaching her breaking point. There was no way all 3 flowers had been defective, especially not the latest one. She had inspected it thoroughly before returning. Taking the flower from her hands, Deucalion pointed toward the familiar crack. Confusion mixed with frustration. That crack hadn't been there earlier. Then suddenly everything clicked. Her eyes shifted toward the roaring fireplace inside the cabin. The answer was obvious. Gathering the last of her strength, Julie turned around for one final attempt. Watching her leave, Deucalion silently wondered whether she had finally figured it out. Not that it mattered. She still wasn't going to pass. By morning, the blizzard had weakened. Sunlight slowly emerged over the frozen horizon. Inside the cabin, the remaining candidates debated whether Julie still had a chance. Meanwhile, Dekillian sat quietly in his chair, waiting. Then suddenly Julie's voice shattered the conversation. She had found another ice flower. The candidates immediately jumped up in excitement. Dekillian remained calm and instructed her to bring it inside. This time, however, Julie didn't move. Standing outside in the snow, she requested that the inspection be conducted outdoors. She confidently declared that this flower wasn't damaged. Though exhausted and barely standing, determination still burned in her eyes. At last she understood. An ice flower made entirely of ice would naturally crack when brought into a warm room. The fireplace had been ruining them all along. For the first time, relief appeared on her face. Then Dekillian crushed it instantly. He refused. The rules had been established from the beginning. He would not move from his seat, not even once. Every possible loophole had already been sealed. Frustration flashed across Julie's face. At that moment, she finally understood the truth. Dekillian had never intended to let her pass. Still seated comfortably, he criticized her lack of attention and reminded her that failing to remember the rules was her own mistake. Julie listened quietly, then calmly accepted responsibility. She admitted her mistake, but surrender was still not an option. Dropping to her knees, she pressed her hands into the snow. Mana surged throughout her body. The next moment, everyone watched in shock. Julie unleashed everything. A massive blue dome of mana expanded outward, engulfing the entire cabin. The freezing energy spread across every surface it touched. Walls froze. Furniture froze. The entire building transformed into a giant block of ice. The fireplace died instantly. Every trace of warmth vanished. Even Dekillian looked surprised. Barely maintaining consciousness, Julie stepped inside carrying the flower. She presented it once more. Dekillian examined it, then spoke. His words landed harder than any storm. Defective. Ice flowers reacted to mana as well. The moment she released such an overwhelming amount, failure became inevitable. Everything she had done was meaningless. Julie didn't look angry anymore or even frustrated. She simply looked exhausted, confused, empty. Then her body finally gave out. The accumulated fatigue struck all at once. Her vision blurred, her legs collapsed beneath her. As she slowly fell to the floor, Dekillian officially announced her elimination. Time passed. Julie lay unconscious in bed. Her body temperature had dropped to a dangerous level, leaving her trapped in a temporary coma. Downstairs, the remaining candidates openly complained about the unfair treatment she had received. Dekillian stood apart from them. His attention was elsewhere. Something about Julie's mana bothered him. This had been the first time he had seen it directly, and it wasn't normal. The moment she released her mana, his enhanced vision had immediately detected abnormalities. Her mana was damaged. Mana damage was an extremely rare condition caused by severe injuries to a person's core. Ordinary wounds couldn't create something like that. Such damage usually required a life-threatening event, yet this wasn't information he remembered from the original story. Julie carrying a condition like this was completely unexpected, which raised an even bigger question. If she truly reached the peak of knighthood despite this handicap, then what exactly had happened to her? The conversations around him continued. The other candidates kept criticizing both the examination and Dekillian himself, but they were fellow knights. If anyone knew the truth, it would be them. Dekillian finally interrupted. He asked whether Julie had suffered a serious injury in the past. The question instantly triggered the blonde knight. Fury flashed across his face. He accused Dekillian of having the audacity to ask after being responsible for what happened in the first place. He questioned how someone could act so ignorant about an injury connected to them. The knight started recalling an old escort mission, then suddenly stopped. Concern replaced his anger. Looking directly at Dekillian, he asked whether Julie was still suffering from the consequences of that incident. And judging by the look on Dekillian's face, he genuinely had no idea what the man was talking about. What Dekillian was hearing wasn't some forgotten rumor or common piece of history. Even as one of the people behind the game's creation, he had never encountered this story before, which raised a troubling possibility. Had all of this happened before the game's timeline even began? The blonde knight then shifted his attention toward Raphael, asking whether he had ever noticed anything unusual while sparring with Julie. After thinking for a moment, Raphael admitted there was something strange. Julie always held herself back. Despite being capable of using sword energy, she never released her mana recklessly or all at once. It was as if she was deliberately restricting herself. The possibility that it was connected to some lingering side effect couldn't be ignored. Dekillian quietly absorbed every word. Then he ended the discussion. The candidates were ordered back to their rooms to rest. The next examination would begin immediately after the eliminated participant departed. The following morning, sunlight reflected off the endless snowfields surrounding the cabin. Outside, Julie stood alone with her belongings packed and ready. Letting out a quiet breath, she prepared to leave. Then Dekillian called out to her. He expressed regret regarding her elimination. Julie turned around and bowed respectfully. In her eyes, the result wasn't unfair. She accepted the blame herself, admitting that her own lack of attention had caused her failure. Just as she was about to depart, Dekillian stopped her once more. There was something he wanted to ask. The promise. The one he had broken, he wanted to hear about it directly from her. To hear those words one more time, the irony wasn't lost on him. The promise had been shattered long ago. Julie still despised him because of it. Yet here he was, holding her back over a memory that should have already been buried. Part of him wondered whether he truly wanted an answer, or whether he simply wanted to keep her standing there a little longer. For a brief moment, he even questioned whether he had started making excuses for the man he had become. After a long silence, Julie finally spoke. It had happened roughly half a year ago. Back then, she received a letter from members of the Luna family. The sender was the mother of a mage who had once worked under Dekulin and later taken his own life. Inside was a detailed account of the terrible things Dekulin had supposedly done. Shocked by what she read, Julie confronted him and demanded the truth. His response had been immediate. He burned the letter right in front of her. That moment became the final push that led her to cancel their engagement, but Dekulin hadn't accepted it quietly. He desperately begged her to reconsider. He promised he would uncover the truth behind everything and personally make things right. That was the promise. And Julie couldn't understand why he suddenly wanted to revisit it now. After hearing her out, Dekulin admitted the blame without hesitation. Everything that happened in the past rested on his shoulders. There was no denying it. However, the research connected to that tragedy had never stopped. The work was still ongoing. He had continued developing the project that the deceased mage started, and because of that, he intended to recognize him as a legitimate co-author. If the research generated profit, the Luna family would receive their rightful share. He also intended to help restore the family from the difficult position they currently faced. Most importantly, when the research was finally published, he would publicly apologize to its true creator. Julie's frustration exploded. If he had already decided all of this, then why hadn't he told her sooner? Why keep silent until now? Dekulin listened without interrupting. Then, in a quiet voice, he apologized again. The only explanation he could offer was a strange one. The Dekulin standing here now wasn't the same Dekulin who existed back then. Those words struck Julie completely off guard. For several seconds, she simply stared at him, struggling to process what she had just heard. Then Dekulin spoke once more. From now on, he would try to let go of his feelings for her. It would be better for both of them if they walked separate paths. He promised that he would deal with those emotions himself so she would never have to carry their weight. Someday, he hoped they would disappear entirely. Julie was left speechless. Of all the things she expected to hear, that wasn't one of them. Without waiting for a response, Dekulin turned around and headed back toward the cabin. Before entering, he told her to travel safely. He acknowledged all the effort she had poured into the examination and offered one final word of comfort. Then he disappeared inside. As Julie walked through the snow-covered landscape, his words lingered in her thoughts. The promise to stop loving her repeated itself again and again. Unexpectedly, a faint smile appeared on her face. For the first time in a long while, she wondered whether Dekulin was genuinely changing. Meanwhile, from the cabin window, Dekulin silently watched her figure disappear into the distance. Even with his incredible mental discipline, one question remained. Why was it still so difficult to let her go? 4 days later, the preliminary evaluations finally concluded. The Imperial Palace tutor had been selected. The 4 knights chosen to represent the era had also been finalized. Holding the imperial decree in his hand, Dekulin couldn't help feeling slightly irritated. After all the effort he spent selecting Rothvel, the emperor had ignored his recommendation entirely and appointed all 4 candidates instead. As for the position of teaching mage, there had never been any real suspense. That role naturally belonged to him. Yet while reviewing the details of his appointment, something unexpected caught his attention. Not long afterward, Dekulin stood before the emperor herself. Kneeling respectfully, he waited for her words. Then he noticed he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was Luna von Graham McQueen. The sight immediately worsened his mood. Out of everyone possible, he had never expected to share this position with her. Luna was perhaps one of the last people capable of viewing Dekulin favorably. Since the floating island incident, they had successfully avoided crossing paths. That fortunate streak had officially ended. Unfortunately for him, the feeling was mutual. From the moment she arrived, Luna's gaze practically drilled holes through him. Several years earlier, during the evaluations for head professor, Luna had been walking through the academy corridors when a group of professors called out to her. They openly expressed their support. Terrified of the possibility that Dekulin might secure the position, they urged her to fight with everything she had. Luna accepted their encouragement with a calm smile. At the time, only 2 candidates remained, Luna and Dekulin. While Dekulin possessed extraordinary talent in magical theory, spell interpretation, and family influence, Luna held the advantage in overall research accomplishments. On top of that, her reputation among the academy staff was exceptional. Nearly every professor supported her. Going into the competition, she had been absolutely convinced that victory was hers. Then disaster struck. One morning, while enjoying a peaceful walk around her residence, servants suddenly rushed past her in panic. The moment she demanded answers, the nightmare began. Her father had suffered a severe injury. Their business partners were abandoning them. Family finances were collapsing. The lady of the household had been involved in an accident. Bandits had attacked their estate. One catastrophe followed another without pause. Standing amidst the chaos, Leona could only watch as her entire world began to crumble, and in her mind, only one name surfaced: Dekilin. Anger twisted her expression. She became convinced that he was systematically destroying everything she loved simply because she had dared to compete for something he wanted. Still, she refused to surrender. She convinced herself she could endure. She believed she could survive it. Reality proved otherwise. Not long afterward, her exhausted father called her to his side. The relentless pressure had broken him. For the sake of the family, he begged her to withdraw from the competition. That was the moment the truth finally became impossible to ignore. When she looked behind her, there was almost nothing left. Her family had already fallen apart. Against someone like Dekilin, they simply lacked the power to fight back. And so, on a cold, rainy day, Leona made her decision. Determined but broken, she headed toward Dekilin's mansion. Soon afterward, raised voices erupted near the estate entrance. The guards were blocking someone attempting to force her way inside. That someone was Leona. Ignoring her pride, she repeatedly called for Dekilin. Eventually, he appeared alongside a servant and asked what kind of disturbance she thought she was causing. The words that followed hurt more than anything she had endured until then, but she said them anyway. She declared that she would withdraw from the competition. All she wanted in return was for him to stop targeting her family. Silence filled the air, then Dekilin laughed. According to him, he had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. The response left Leona completely stunned. With an icy expression, he remarked that her sudden visit had made him assume she came to apologize. Apparently, that wasn't the case. Confused and furious, Leona stood frozen as Dekilin stepped closer. He reminded her that the McQueen family had survived for years thanks to support from the Uklan family. Without that assistance, they would have disappeared long ago. Yet despite all of that, they behaved with ingratitude. In his eyes, she was the one who owed an apology. The sheer arrogance was unbelievable. The man she believed had ruined her entire family now stood before her demanding gratitude. She had convinced herself that surrendering her dream would finally end the nightmare. Instead, she was being humiliated even further. That day taught her a cruel lesson. When someone possesses overwhelming power, fairness becomes meaningless. Reason becomes meaningless. Justice becomes meaningless. In the end, Leona lowered herself to her knees. The humiliation was unbearable, but protecting her family mattered more than her pride. So she apologized. Even then, Dekilin looked unimpressed. Towering over her, he mocked her weakness and treated her like something beneath him. To him, she was nothing more than a pathetic obstacle standing where she didn't belong. Eventually, he ordered her to disappear from his sight. If she wanted her family to recover, she was to stay away from him permanently. And Leona could do nothing except endure it. Tears streamed down her face. Frustration, humiliation, helplessness, anger, all of it mixed together as she remembered that terrible night. Back in the present, Leona once again knelt beside Dekilin before the Emperor. The memory remained as sharp as ever, and one thing had never changed. Someday she intended to make him pay for it. The following day, the atmosphere throughout the academy felt noticeably different. The corridors buzzed louder than usual, packed with whispers and uneasy speculation. Every corner buzzed with rumors about someone who had seemingly vanished overnight. Students gathered in small groups, trading theories and speculation, trying to piece together what had happened. As Dekilin walked through the hallways, he could feel the weight of countless eyes following him. Some didn't even bother hiding their suspicions. More than a few students openly wondered whether the disappearance had something to do with him. The whispers continued wherever he went. And at the center of every conversation was the same name, Leona. The newly appointed tutor had disappeared without a trace. Later, during class, Dekilin delivered his lecture as usual. Mana disasters occasionally appeared throughout the world. Mana storms, flames, fog, rain, dust, phenomena feared by ordinary people. But to a mage, they weren't simply disasters. They were manifestations of pure elemental combinations, complex interactions of magical forces. While his mouth explained magical theory, his thoughts remained elsewhere entirely. Leona's disappearance. Ever since she vanished, suspicion had practically attached itself to him. Frankly, he would rather spend hours dealing with clueless freshmen than navigate this mess. Still, worrying wouldn't solve anything. As far as he knew, her disappearance had absolutely nothing to do with him. The following day, while inside his residence, the butler informed him that a visitor had arrived. Someone from the security bureau. The name immediately caught his attention. Lilia Freyden, the deputy director who had previously handled the train incident. Making his way to the entrance, Dekilin greeted her and asked the purpose of her visit. Lilia didn't waste time, she was investigating Leona's disappearance. Remaining calm, Dekilin directly asked whether she considered him a suspect. Lilia dismissed the notion with professional ease. Officially, this was merely a routine investigation. However, there was one detail she couldn't ignore. The last confirmed person seen with Leona was Dekilin himself. After their audience with the Emperor and the tutoring session that followed, Leona had seemingly vanished. Meeting his gaze with sharp, unwavering eyes, Lilia asked whether anything unusual had occurred. Deculine's answer was immediate, nothing. After a few additional questions, the interview ended and Lilia departed. Deculine returned inside. The entire experience left him irritated. Being constantly watched and silently judged wasn't pleasant. The Bureau claimed they weren't suspicious of him, but those words felt hollow. Considering the original Deculine's history, anyone would be foolish not to suspect him. Opening the door to his room, he suddenly stopped. Something was wrong. A blue aura filled the entire space. Mana drifted through the room like flowing mist. Then a faint voice echoed around him. It questioned whether Deculine had forgot his followers. They were waiting for new orders. Approaching the source of the mana, Deculine placed a hand on the table where it seemed to originate. It was unmistakably a message, but the contents immediately raised alarm bells. Followers, orders. The wording pointed toward only one possibility: the original Deculine's hidden organization, his underground network. A cold feeling crept across Deculine's skin. Receiving a message like this while Luna was missing couldn't possibly be a coincidence. For the first time, a disturbing thought surfaced. What if the original Deculine truly was involved in her disappearance? Before he could think further, a sudden noise sounded behind him. His body tensed instantly. Silence filled the room. Then from a dark corner a figure slowly materialized. A hooded man. The stranger dropped to one knee, then respectfully addressed Deculine as his master. The spell itself was impressive. This wasn't ordinary illusion magic. It was an extremely advanced technique. Choosing to play along, Deculine calmly instructed the man to lead the way. Soon the scenery changed completely. Gone were the glamorous streets of the capital. Instead, they entered a rundown district buried beneath poverty. Beggars lined the roads. Trash covered the streets. Abandoned children, struggling families, and the sick filled every corner. Even within a mighty empire, light and darkness existed side by side. According to the hooded guide, if Imperium represented the Empire's shining face, then Oakland represented everything hidden beneath it, the darkness supporting the light. Deculine silently observed the surroundings as they moved deeper into the district. Eventually, they stopped before a decaying abandoned building. The hooded man instructed him to enter. Then the illusion vanished entirely. Inside, a narrow underground passage stretched into darkness. At the end waited a massive hidden chamber. Two hooded figures were already kneeling there. The moment they greeted him as their master, everything clicked. Deculine finally understood who these people were. Walking forward, he immediately asked what mission he had supposedly assigned them. One of the figures raised his head, then explained the order. If Luna ever set foot inside the capital, she was to receive no mercy. The pieces instantly fell into place. Luna's kidnapping, the hidden organization, the mysterious disappearance. This wasn't random. It was the work of the original Deculine's network. Fortunately, there wasn't an active death variable targeting him yet. Still, judging by the behavior of these operatives, even his own subordinates didn't seem particularly fond of him. Pushing those thoughts aside, Deculine demanded to see Luna. A short time later, he entered another isolated room. There she was. Luna sat tied to a chair. A sack covered her head. One of the operatives informed him that she had been injected with anti-mana toxins, leaving her unable to use mana and significantly weakened. As Deculine stared at the unconscious Luna, his mind raced. This situation was catastrophic. His subordinates had kidnapped her. And from Luna's perspective, there was no possible universe where Deculine wasn't responsible. The death variable surrounding her practically flooded the room. If he didn't resolve this misunderstanding quickly, things could spiral beyond recovery. His thoughts were interrupted when one of the operatives handed him a document. Apparently it was important. Deculine accepted the paper and began reading. At first he expected routine information, then his expression changed. His eyes widened. The deeper he read, the worse it became. Sweat slowly formed across his face. Line after line revealed things he never expected to see. When he finally reached the end, he silently returned the document, then thanked the operatives and instructed them to leave. He wanted to speak with Luna alone. The two assassins exchanged uneasy glances, even they seemed nervous. Still, neither dared question him. They obeyed and exited the room. Now alone, Deculine stared at Luna. His face was tense, determined. The next moment, the ropes binding her loosened. The sack covering her head fell away. Luna slowly opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was Deculine. Instantly, rage exploded across her face. She shouted his name. To her, this was proof. Every suspicion she held had just been confirmed. Furious, she demanded to know what he was planning. She reminded him that she now served as one of the Emperor's tutors. If she reported this to the throne, the consequences would be obvious. Deculine remained completely unfazed. Instead, he calmly advised her to choose her next words carefully. After all, she was the one tied up and powerless. The reality of her situation forced Luna to restrain herself. Slowly, she regained control. Then she asked the question that truly mattered. Was this all a continuation of the past? Had destroying her family not been enough? Was he planning to keep tormenting her forever? Her voice grew louder with every accusation. Then Deculine interrupted her. The statement that followed completely blindsided her. According to him, she would become head professor. For a moment, Luna could only stare. If that was true, then why had he kidnapped her? Dekulin already knew there was no peaceful way out of this situation. Earlier, while reading the report handed to him by the assassins, he had discovered a horrifying truth. Every terrible thing the original Dekulin had ever done was documented there. Assaults, kidnappings, threats. The orders came from Dekulin. The subordinates merely carried them out. At that moment, he realized something important. Nothing he said would erase Luna's hatred, but eliminating her wasn't an option either. Her role in the future was too important. The influence she carried over major events couldn't be replaced. He needed Luna alive, and he needed her cooperation, which meant he would have to use something the original Dekulin stole from her. Stepping closer, he fully embraced the role of the old Dekulin. He questioned why she had dared return to the capital despite his warning. Luna answered immediately. According to their previous agreement, her debt to the Ukline family had already been repaid. Therefore, his warning should no longer matter. Hearing this, Dekulin sighed, then looked at her as though she were being absurd. He asked how she could possibly believe the debt was settled. According to him, she was acting irresponsibly. Luna's confusion only deepened. Then Dekulin leaned closer and doubled down. There was one detail she had overlooked. Compound interest. 15 years earlier, House Ukline had loaned House McQueen 100 million elnas at 20% annual interest, which meant the amount owed had grown astronomically. According to his interpretation, the debt remained unpaid. She had broken the agreement. And because of that, he could legally seize her assets. The man had transformed into the final boss of loan sharks. Luna immediately exploded. The claim was ridiculous. She threatened legal action and argued that no such law existed. Dekulin simply explained the truth. The contract contained what was known as a poison clause. The original Dekulin had intentionally written the agreement to disguise cumulative interest calculations. It was designed to mislead, a legal trap, an evil tactic. Yet now, ironically, he had no choice but to use it, because there was something far more important at stake. Looking directly at Luna, Dekulin finally presented an offer. The proposal caught her completely off guard. If she helped him become director, he would consider reducing the debt burden hanging over her family. As head professor, the offer irritated her immediately. Yet Dekulin continued. He wasn't even sure she deserved such generosity. After all, she had already proven herself capable of breaking agreements, even if she had done so unknowingly. Finally, he tossed a ledger onto her lap. Inside were the terms. The first condition was simple. Everything that happened today would remain secret. The second condition was even more significant. For the next 5 years, she would abide by the contract. The contract's final condition was absurdly harsh. If Luna violated its terms, her inner core would be destroyed. The moment she finished reading it, her patience snapped. Furious, she lashed out at Dekulin, accusing him of falling back into the same dirty tricks he had always used. Yet Dekulin remained completely unmoved. He simply turned and began walking away. Before leaving, however, he stopped and glanced back one final time. There was one more thing she needed to know. If she honored the agreement until the end, he would return House McQueen's secret technique. The words struck her like lightning. Old memories immediately surfaced. House McQueen's secret technique wasn't just some valuable asset. It was the treasured inheritance of her bloodline, the heirloom Dekulin had seized when he crushed her family. More than wealth, more than status. That technique was the very heart of her grudge, and the thing she wanted back more than anything else. As Dekulin disappeared from the room, he advised her to think carefully before making a decision, leaving behind a stunned Luna. Meanwhile, Dekulin climbed the narrow staircase above. His thoughts drifted elsewhere. Using the heirloom as leverage had been a gamble. Would it actually work? And if it didn't remove the death variable, he would have no choice but to use his final option. Before he could finish the thought, a notification appeared. Death variable removed. Reward granted 2 store currency units. The moment he saw it, a dangerous smile crept across his face. Looks like the gamble paid off. Back upstairs, the 2 assassins were waiting. Dekulin praised them for completing the mission and prepared to leave. That response immediately irritated the younger girl. She exploded, shouting after him. She demanded that he fulfill his promise. They had carried out the dirty work exactly as instructed. He had promised compensation. Before she could continue, the hooded man struck her hard enough to send her crashing to the ground. The girl stared at him in disbelief. Injured and furious, she called him brother and demanded to know why he had done that. The man ignored her entirely. Instead, he turned toward Dekulin and apologized. Dekulin waved it off, then calmly asked what promise they were talking about. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Dark emotions surfaced in the hooded man's expression. According to him, the promised reward had been simple, freedom, and immense wealth. The answer amused Dekulin. The brother had disciplined his sister without hesitation, but beneath that loyalty, resentment still lingered. Both of them carried grudges toward him, and honestly, it wasn't hard to understand why. They had spent years carrying out Dekulin's orders, the worst orders. Knowing that kind of resentment existed was uncomfortable. Unfortunately, removing them wasn't an option. The wealthy magnate trait was glowing brightly around both siblings. There was profit hidden here, potential. He simply needed to stop using them for dirty work moving forward. That was manageable. After a brief silence, Dekulin made them an unexpected offer. Not only would he honor the original promise, he would hire them as well. The announcement completely stunned both siblings. For several seconds they simply stared. Then gratitude flooded their faces. Both immediately bowed deeply before him, thanking him repeatedly. There was just one additional condition. From now on, every old standing order issued by Dekulin was cancelled, no more carrying out previous instructions. The siblings agreed without hesitation. With that resolved, Dekulin dismissed them. Finally, for the first time in what felt like forever, he had a moment to himself. The endless chaos, investigations, kidnappings, and death variables had drained him. Thankfully, this particular mess was finally over. Back at the Magic Tower dormitories, Ephraim and her friend walked through the corridor in noticeably poor spirits. Then something caught Ephraim's attention. Someone nearby mentioned a magic circle. She looked up. A small crowd had gathered outside a certain room. Dark energy leaked from the doorway. The sight felt strangely familiar. This was the exact location where an unknown magic circle had appeared at the beginning of the semester. She had assumed it had already been removed. Apparently not. As she stared, the atmosphere suddenly changed. A violent surge of dark mana erupted from the circle. Students standing closest to it had no time to react. The dark energy swallowed them whole. One moment they were there, the next they were gone. Only Ephraim and her friend, who had been standing farther away, remained behind as witnesses. Elsewhere, Dekulin's carriage raced through the streets toward the university. Inside, he sat comfortably while speaking with his new chauffeur. Ren, curious about how he was adjusting to his new position, Dekulin asked for his thoughts. Ren responded positively. The answer pleased him. The former assassin siblings, Ren and Anan, now lived within the Eucline estate and worked directly under him. In the past, they had committed countless terrible acts while following Dekulin's orders. That chapter was over. He had no intention of using them that way again. At first, both siblings were suspicious of his sudden change in attitude. But after receiving proper compensation and fair treatment, they gradually accepted him as their lord. Meanwhile, his former chauffeur Jeff had received a promotion into general office work. The man was absurdly happy. Apparently, landing his first proper 9-to-5 job felt like winning the lottery. Eventually, the carriage arrived at the university. Dekulin stepped outside, then immediately realized something was wrong. The entire campus was covered in dark energy. Mana flooded the grounds like a black fog. Almost instantly, a notification appeared before him. This wasn't an ordinary system message. This was different. This was the beginning. The main quest had officially started. Back inside the university building, a massive mana dome now surrounded the entire area. At its center stood the same mysterious magic circle. Teachers and students alike had gathered around it. Nobody seemed to know what to do. The situation was rapidly becoming chaotic. Watching the indecision around her, Ephraim grew increasingly frustrated. Most of the students who had disappeared were commoners, yet the professor seemed frozen, unable or unwilling to act. Finally, Ephraim stepped forward. She directly urged the professors to enter the portal and investigate. One professor immediately shot down the suggestion and angrily criticized her for even proposing it. The reaction only made her angrier. Weren't these people supposed to be educators? The fat professor awkwardly suggested that another professor should enter since he specialized in destructive magic. The man immediately came up with an excuse, claiming he wasn't feeling well. With the director absent, everyone seemed more concerned with protecting themselves than saving students. That was the final straw. Ephraim's patience finally shattered. Handing her bag to Julie, she asked her to keep it safe, then prepared to enter the portal herself. Julie clearly disliked the idea, but Ephraim had already made up her mind. Just as she started forward, a voice stopped her. Sylvia. Turning around, Ephraim told her to move aside if she wasn't planning to help. Everyone's hesitation was driving her crazy. The professors acted important. The nobles acted superior. Yet the moment danger appeared, they all backed away. If nobody else would act, then she would. Determination burning in her eyes, Ephraim charged toward the portal. Again, Sylvia stopped her. This time, she ignored the accusation that she was simply picking on Ephraim. Panic wasn't going to solve anything. She needed to think, to analyze. Sylvia pointed toward the portal and instructed her to look carefully. Stepping forward, Sylvia condensed mana into a precise arrow and fired it directly at the doorway. The impact disrupted the surrounding mana flow. Dark energy immediately leaked outward. Not ordinary mana, demonic mana. The amount was small but unmistakable. Turning back toward Ephraim, Sylvia scolded her for rushing in blindly. A debutante had no business charging into something like this without understanding it first. As much as Ephraim hated admitting it, Sylvia was right. Then another voice interrupted them. Someone had arrived. Both girls turned around. Dekulin was approaching. His briefcase floated beside him through mana manipulation while students and professors instinctively stepped aside. The man wasn't even trying. After reaching the scene, he complained about the noise filling the corridor. Dark mana continued spilling from the portal. One glance was enough. Decillion immediately recognized it as a form of barrier magic. However, even his comprehension abilities couldn't fully identify the exact spell. There was only one option left. He drew the Euclid wand, a tool specifically designed to amplify Euclid magic during exorcisms and spiritual purification. Focusing the demonic energy into a single point, he struck the barrier. A massive explosion of mana erupted outward. Everyone nearby braced themselves. The corridor shook violently, then the dust settled. A gigantic dark portal now stood fully open. The crowd stared in shock. Decillion simply stood there as if none of it was unusual, like this was just another Tuesday. Without hesitation, he stepped through, leaving everyone else behind to process what had just happened. On the other side lay an eerie mansion, silent, abandoned. The moment Decillion emerged from the crimson portal, he immediately understood where the missing students had gone. Inside the mansion's main hall, a group of terrified students huddled together. The second they saw him, relief flooded their faces. To them, rescue had finally arrived. Approaching the group, Decillion asked whether everyone was present. The students explained that several others remained upstairs. One student warned him that searching for them could be dangerous. Fortunately, Decillion already had a solution. Opening his briefcase, he released dozens of silver fragments. The metallic shards floated through the air, wrapped in mana. They scattered throughout the mansion like glowing blue fireflies. During all the cleanup work and side quests he had completed, Decillion never neglected his training. To strengthen his telekinesis, he had continuously enhanced his body with metal reinforcement and repeatedly practiced memorized spell structures. Part of the technique was even integrated into wood steel to reduce the strain. The result was extraordinary. He had unlocked one of the game's hidden bonuses, wood steel detection. The silver fragments rapidly spread through the building, and within moments they located every missing student. The achievement stemmed from his mastery of pure elemental comprehension. His practical proficiency had finally reached perfection, granting him an entirely new perception of space itself. Without wasting time, Decillion guided the remaining students back to the main hall. The moment they reunited, relief spread through the group. Everyone was safe, at least for now, but a larger problem remained. Decillion could withstand the demonic energy. Most mages couldn't. The longer they remained trapped here, the more dangerous the situation would become. A quick calculation told him he lacked the time necessary to fully dismantle the barrier, which meant he needed another solution. Then a realization struck him. Barriers like this didn't activate on their own. The spell itself wasn't enough. Somewhere within this mansion there had to be a trigger, and finding it had just become his top priority. And if he could locate that trigger, everything would fall into place. That was the key. The silver shards surrounding Decillion rose into the air once more. A moment later, they shot across the room in every direction, startling the students as they instinctively backed away. But this wasn't random. This was a search. The shards continued weaving through the hall, scanning every corner, every person, every trace of mana. Then, after several tense moments, a faint smile appeared on Decillion's face. He had found it. The one who activated the barrier wasn't hiding somewhere outside. The caster was among them, which meant only one thing: the shards lifted again. This time they moved even faster. The students panicked, shouting for their professor to stop, but Decillion paid them no attention. The blades of silver swept past every student, slicing away tiny strands of hair, one after another, until finally a crimson strand was severed. The moment it fell, it crumbled into ash. There was no doubt anymore. The culprit had been exposed. Decillion's gaze shifted toward the red-haired dorm supervisor, the girl with glasses standing among them. Calmly, he asked if she was the one responsible. The girl's expression instantly changed. She tried to deny it, tried to act confused, but Decillion immediately shut down the performance. The origin engraved within her couldn't be hidden, not from him. The ashes falling from her hair were proof enough. There was nowhere left to run. Frustration twisted across her face. Then the innocent mask vanished completely. The timid dorm supervisor disappeared. In her place stood someone else entirely. A cold, piercing stare locked onto Decillion. An Ashborn mage, Ashes, one of the 4 pillars supporting the magical world. A name most mages preferred not to say aloud, because Ashes wasn't simply an organization. It was a sanctuary for illegal mages, dark practitioners, and the things respectable society pretended didn't exist. Knowing she'd been exposed beyond recovery, the girl finally admitted it, but she wasn't done yet. Raising a hand, she allowed a sinister green aura to seep from her body. With a twisted smile, she declared that Ashborn never forgave those who dared call them by that name. The threat sounded intimidating. The reality was less impressive. Before she could launch her attack, Decillion's shards were already moving. The girl braced for impact, yet the shards flew right past her, straight toward the students behind. For a split second, everyone thought the worst. Then the shards hooked onto collars and clothing, lifting the students into the air like laundry hanging on a clothesline before pulling them safely behind Decillion. The sheer disrespect of the move infuriated her. Grinding her teeth, she launched her attack. Flaming arrows erupted from every direction as she rushed forward. On the opposite side, Decillion didn't move an inch. The students stood behind him, the arrows closed in, then they struck, or at least they should have. The moment they touched Dekillion, the spell simply unraveled. Gone, no explosion. No damage, nothing. When the dust cleared, Dekillion remained standing exactly where he started, wand in hand and a faint smirk on his face, almost amused. He wondered aloud whether she was holding back after making such bold threats. The Ashborn mage froze. Her attacks had done absolutely nothing. Suppressing her irritation, she prepared another spell. According to her, that had only been a greeting. The next attack would be different. A concentrated spear of mana exploded from her hand. Dekillion casually swung his wand, the spear vanished, another spell followed, then another, then another. Each one met the exact same fate, destroyed before reaching him. Eventually, realization struck her. Dekillion wasn't tanking her magic, he was dismantling it, spell by spell, structure by structure. She had never seen anything like it. What she failed to realize was that the battlefield itself had betrayed her. The thin layer of demonic energy saturating the area had become Dekillion's ally. The Eucline bloodline allowed him to purify surrounding demonic mana and convert it into his own strength whenever facing demons or fighting within corrupted territory. Inside this barrier, his mana supply was practically endless. The fight had been decided long before it started. Finally deciding he'd seen enough, Dekillion released a wave of mana that shattered every active spell around him. Then he ordered her to surrender. The girl's breathing had become ragged. The repeated casting was wearing her down. Looking at her exhausted state, Dekillion remarked that this was precisely why people called them Ashborn. The words instantly reignited her anger, but Dekillion continued. According to him, they were worse than refuse, discarded by society, creatures whose only talent was wriggling through darkness. Their nature was so low and rotten that redemption itself seemed impossible. At this point, he wasn't just speaking. He was channeling peak Dekillion energy. The insults cut deeper than any weapon. Forcing a sarcastic smile, the girl fired back. If he was truly so amazing, why hadn't he dismantled the barrier before children started dying? Was it because he couldn't? Dekillion simply smiled, then calmly told her to pay attention. He was about to explain exactly where she went wrong. The silver shards launched forward again. At first glance, they seemed aimed at her. They weren't. The projectiles slammed into walls, floors, support structures, every corner of the building. The entire mansion trembled. Looking directly at her, Dekillion called her an idiot. She had attached the spell to the building itself rather than anchoring it to the surrounding space. A fatal mistake. Destroy the structure, destroy the barrier, simple. That was the difference in understanding between them. The Ashborn mage stared in disbelief, then shouted at him. Who in their right mind would collapse an entire building just to break a barrier? Ignoring the question, Dekillion calmly addressed her by name. All rose. The moment she heard it, her face froze. Dekillion smiled slightly. Did she really think he wouldn't figure it out? The silver shards embedded throughout the building suddenly glowed crimson. Then they exploded, one after another. The mansion shook violently. The ceiling cracked. Debris rained from above. Standing amid the chaos, Allrose looked at Dekillion like he was insane. Did he actually intend to bring the whole structure down? Dekillion merely laughed at her growing panic, then asked a different question. Would she finally return to her true form? The fact that he knew so much about her left Allrose speechless. Before she could react, Dekillion raised his wand. A single metal shard fired forward, faster than a bullet, cleaner than a blade. In an instant her head separated from her body, but there was no blood, no corpse. The figure instantly transformed into a wooden puppet that collapsed onto the floor, a decoy. The real Allrose had never been standing there. Turning away from the puppet, Dekillion addressed the students. Everyone was ordered to gather close and prepare themselves. Outside the barrier, the building suddenly began collapsing. Julie grabbed Ephraim by the arm and pulled her away as both girls sprinted from the crumbling structure. The academy grounds shook. Then came the explosion. Smoke burst outward, stone shattered, and the entire building collapsed in on itself. Students and professors watched from a safe distance, anxiety spreading through the crowd. Nobody knew what had happened inside. Nobody knew whether the trapped students were alive. Then Julie spotted something. Immediately calling out to Ephraim, she pointed toward the rubble. There they were, Professor Dekillion, and every single student who had been taken, alive. Rescuers quickly helped them out of the wreckage. Ephraim and Julie rushed forward. The reunited students embraced one another, overwhelmed with relief. One student couldn't even hold back tears. The stress finally caught up with him. Between sobs, he explained everything. How Dekillion had saved them. How he had entered alone. How he had defeated the mage responsible. For Ephraim, the story hit harder than expected. She had always viewed Dekillion as a fraud. A privileged noble who climbed to the top through influence, money, and stolen credit. Yet the man she saw today was completely different. No fraud could resolve a disaster like this. No fake could save everyone trapped inside. For the first time, her image of him began to crack. A system notification suddenly appeared before Dekillion. Main quest complete. The very first major quest of the game had officially been cleared. While relief spread through the academy, another conversation was taking place nearby, far from celebrating. Inside a narrow alley, irritated voices cursed the Ashborn operative for failing her mission. A hooded man watched the academy from the shadows. Beside him stood a blonde girl with sharp eyes and an even sharper attitude. The hooded man clicked his tongue. Losing to academy weaklings was humiliating. A blow to their reputation. The blonde girl disagreed. Assuming Dekulin was weak had been the real mistake. She warned him not to underestimate that man. While speaking, she held a strange vial filled with glowing crimson liquid. Extending it toward him, she pointed out that despite the unexpected outcome, the mission hadn't been a complete failure. The vial wasn't full, but the collection was sufficient. The hooded man nodded. Patience had always been their method. Slowly, quietly. And whenever things collapsed, people would blame demons like they always did. The blonde girl listened to his rambling with visible annoyance. Then he lifted the vial toward the sky and began preaching about his devotion, his loyalty, his dream of creating the ultimate vessel. A body worthy of bringing his supreme master back into the mortal world. The girl remained silent, watching, judging. In her eyes they were pathetic, nothing but fanatics worshipping a dead relic from the past. Every encounter with them left a bitter taste in her mouth. Yet for now she needed them. Their goals aligned just enough. She wanted materials for her dolls. They wanted their resurrection. Mutual exploitation was good enough. No need to think deeper than that. Meanwhile, Dekulin already understood something important. This incident wasn't the work of a lone rogue mage. Someone bigger was moving behind the scenes. Examining the remains of the magic circle beneath the rubble, he noticed something unusual. The structure of the spell was unlike anything taught at the academy. Its shape was bizarre, distorted, unnatural. Almost identical to the formula Epheren had recreated before. Curious, Dekulin reconstructed part of the spell and injected mana into it. Immediately, eerie violet waves spread outward. Ancient runic messages surfaced within the energy. A message, a warning, a declaration. The punishment of ash would come. The day humanity's weakness and fragility would be tested was approaching. The words hit Dekulin like a bolt of lightning. As someone involved in the game's development, he recognized the significance immediately. This wasn't just another enemy faction. This was something far worse. At long last, the true villain lurking behind the story had finally revealed itself. And for the first time, its fangs were pointed directly at the Empire. The following day, classes resumed as if everything had returned to normal. But the atmosphere inside the classroom said otherwise. The previous day's incident still lingered in everyone's minds. Fear, curiosity, and unease hung in the air so heavily that even breathing felt awkward. Stepping to the front, Dekulin addressed the students. There was no point obsessing over the incident anymore. Matters like that belonged to the Imperial Investigation Bureau now. Still, there was another issue demanding their attention. A new Imperial directive had arrived, and it wasn't optional. A fresh field assignment had been added to their curriculum. The destination was the Dark Mountains. The name immediately struck Epheren. Of all places, it had to be there. That cursed mountain range was where she had nearly lost her life during her encounter with a demon. The area had been sealed after that disaster, and now she was heading straight back into it. Determined not to be intimidated, Epheren pushed her way through the dense forest. Moonlight filtered through the trees above, providing the only guidance available. The assignment itself came directly from the Emperor. Future encounters with demons were inevitable, and the next generation of mages needed experience before facing real danger. There were 3 objectives. The first was collecting magical materials. The second was observing a mana phenomenon. The third was defeating a magical beast. So far, Epheren hadn't completed a single one. As she continued deeper into the forest, a sudden rustle erupted from nearby bushes. Her entire body tensed instantly. In a place like this, even the smallest disturbance could mean death. She immediately spun around and prepared a spell. Certain that a magical beast was about to leap out, she boldly challenged whatever was hiding there, promising it a miserable end. Almost as if responding to her threat, the rustling intensified. The bushes shook harder, then silence. A dark silhouette emerged. Epheren nearly attacked, then froze. It was Sylvia. And judging from her expression, she wasn't having a great day. Epheren's combat stance disappeared immediately. Sylvia, meanwhile, couldn't resist mocking the dramatic speech she had just delivered to a bush. Afterward, the two continued traveling together. Epheren casually asked whether Sylvia was already trying to finish the assignment before everyone else. Sylvia's answer came without hesitation. As always, she wasn't the type to sugarcoat anything. The conversation shifted toward the assignment itself. Curious, Epheren asked whether Sylvia had completed any objectives yet. The answer left her stunned. Sylvia had already finished the mana phenomenon observation task. Her expression turned serious as she explained. Something was wrong with the mountain. Time itself had become distorted. According to Sylvia, she had already spent over 20 hours inside the forest. The statement made no sense. Epheren had only been here for around 2 hours. Confusion immediately filled her face. Then she noticed something. Sylvia looked exhausted. Her clothes were dirty. Her appearance was disheveled. There was no way someone like Sylvia would end up looking like that after only 2 hours of wandering. Clearly, something far stranger was happening. Before Efren could question her further, a voice suddenly interrupted. The speaker apologized for the inconvenience. Elsewhere, near the forest entrance, Dekulin stood alongside the faculty members monitoring the exercise. Then frantic shouting echoed from behind. A group of Imperial Knights came rushing forward, and they looked genuinely panicked. One knight stepped ahead and delivered urgent news. Information from the Intelligence Bureau had just arrived. Rohachan had entered the Dark Mountains. For the first time in a while, Dekulin's expression visibly changed. Not irritation, not annoyance, fear, actual fear. Rohachan wasn't simply dangerous. He was a nightmare, a monster whose name alone was enough to terrify veteran mages. And now hundreds of students were scattered throughout the same mountain range. If even one of them crossed paths with him, the situation could spiral into disaster. As if confirming his worst fears, a system notification immediately appeared. Mid-boss event activated. Reward 2 store tokens. Without wasting another second, Dekulin ordered the knights to follow him. The group immediately rushed into the forest. Their priority was simple: find the students before Rohachan did. According to intelligence reports, Rohachan had spent months disguising himself as a man named Mikan. Even after the Bureau discovered his identity, countless agents had failed to catch him. Every pursuit ended the same way: he escaped. And now he had cornered himself within the Dark Mountains. Back inside the forest, Efren and Sylvia found themselves facing the source of the mysterious voice. An old man emerged from the undergrowth. His appearance was messy and unremarkable, yet his smile was surprisingly warm. The old man politely apologized for the strange time distortion. According to him, it wasn't the mountain causing the phenomenon, it was merely a side effect of his barrier. Slowly approaching the girls, he introduced himself. Mikan. At first glance, he looked like a harmless, eccentric grandfather, but Sylvia noticed something immediately: the pressure surrounding him. It felt overwhelming. Like standing before an archmage. Breaking the silence, Mikan explained that he had been drawn toward the purity of their mana, which sounded significantly creepier than he probably intended. Then he made an offer: help him solve a small problem. In return, he would provide a generous reward. The proposal practically screamed suspicious. Unfortunately, neither girl knew what was hidden behind that harmless smile. Scattered behind him were the bodies of countless academy students, lifeless, forgotten. The moment Efren heard the word reward, however, most of her skepticism vanished. Her first concern wasn't danger, it was payment. Specifically whether she would receive it before or after completing the task. Rohachan chuckled and raised both hands. The surrounding mana gathered instantly, then something incredible happened. 2 fairies materialized from the condensed mana. Without warning, they shot towards Sylvia and Efren. Neither girl had time to react. The spirits entered their bodies. Immediately, intense heat spread throughout them. Panic flashed across their faces. Seeing this, Rohachan calmly instructed them to relax and accept the spirits. With little choice, Efren followed his guidance. Both girls focused inward. Gradually, the foreign mana merged with their own. The fusion triggered a powerful surge. Mana erupted across the area. After a lengthy struggle, the process finally stabilized. The sensation was strange. Their bodies felt lighter, stronger, more complete. Rohachan explained that the entities were spirits, and only individuals with exceptional talent could successfully accept them. Sylvia had already figured that part out. These weren't ordinary spirits, they were light spirits, among the highest grade spirits possible. Beings born from the fusion of water, wind, earth, and fire attributes. The fact that this old man casually created 2 of them was absurd. No ordinary mage could accomplish something like that. While Sylvia tried to understand his motives, Rohachan reached into his robes. Pulling out a letter, he extended it toward them. He asked the girls to deliver it on his behalf. Apparently, he had important matters demanding his attention. Still completely unaware of the danger she was standing in front of, Efren immediately agreed. After all, she hadn't received money. But what she gained instead was arguably worth far more. As Rohachan continued explaining the details, another voice suddenly echoed through the forest. The old man immediately recognized it. Looking up, he smiled. Dekulin had arrived. The Euclid staff stood behind him. Metal shards floated around him like a swarm of silver predators. Every sign pointed toward a confrontation. Yet Dekulin's tone remained surprisingly calm. He casually greeted Rohachan and asked how he had been. The name alone made both girls freeze. Cold sweat rolled down their backs. The harmless old man, the strange benefactor, the spirit summoner, he was actually Rohachan, one of the most powerful mages alive, and simultaneously one of the most infamous criminals on the continent. His most notorious crime remained etched into history: the assassination of the former empress. Beyond that, he was also one of the major named characters within the game itself. The moment Dekulin and Rohachan faced each other, another system notification appeared. Main quest updated. Objective: receive something from Rohachan. Reward 1 store token. Meanwhile, Efren and Sylvia were still processing reality. They turned toward Dekulin and desperately asked whether it was true. Was this old man really Rohachan? Before Dekulin could answer, Rohachan spoke first. The moment he heard the girls address Dekulin as senior professor, genuine confusion crossed his face. From what he remembered, the Deculion he once taught possessed mediocre talent, certainly not enough to rise this far. With a cold gaze, Rohakan openly questioned him. Had he stepped on others to reach his current position? Had he ruined lives along the way? The accusation lingered in the air. Deculion remained calm. The man standing here was no longer the Deculion Rohakan remembered, and the fact that he had breached this seemingly impossible barrier proved it. Those words made Rohakan pause. For the first time he began reconsidering what stood before him. The atmosphere grew heavier by the second. Recognizing the danger, Deculion immediately ordered the girls to leave. Now, seeing their fear, Rohakan also offered reassurance. The spirits inside them wouldn't cause harm. As long as the letter was delivered, everything would be fine. The girls had little choice but to trust him. Pointing toward the exit, Deculion directed them to follow the path marked by his floating steel blade. Staying any longer could cost them their lives. Reluctantly, the girls disappeared into the forest. Only after they were gone did Deculion fully prepare himself. His expression hardened. Metal shards emerged from the suitcase and surrounded him from every angle. Ready, waiting. Across from him, Rohakan remained perfectly relaxed. Within a single instant, he analyzed the entirety of the forest trapped inside his barrier. 157 people wandered within, 23 were attempting to dismantle the barrier. 37 more were forcing their way through it. Every movement, every location, every action. He monitored all of it simultaneously. Yet not a hint of strain appeared on his face. Smiling casually, Rohakan condensed mana into his hand, then looked directly at Deculion. Was he trying to buy time? Because it wouldn't matter. No matter how many reinforcements arrived, the outcome wouldn't change. After all, he had already buried several investigation bureau agents who came after him disguised as ordinary people, and he didn't seem remotely concerned about adding more names to that list. Rohakan had already made up his mind. He was tired of watching more people die because of him. If a battle broke out here, blood would spill again, but Deculion never planned on losing from the very beginning. Taking the silence as an answer, Rohakan gathered mana and prepared himself for combat. Then Deculion spoke, and the words completely derailed the confrontation. He had no intention of losing, because he had no intention of fighting. The statement hung in the air. Then Deculion calmly walked toward Rohakan as if he were speaking to an old acquaintance rather than one of the most dangerous criminals alive. He only wanted to know one thing. Had Rohakan come to the Dark Mountains to destroy the temple? The question hit like a thunderbolt. For the first time since their meeting began, genuine shock crossed Rohakan's face. How could he possibly know that? Yet Deculion remained as composed as ever. Without hesitation, he pointed out the weakest route through the surrounding security network. Northwest. That was where the defenses were thinnest. If Rohakan intended to leave, that was his path. At this point, the old mage felt like he was being dragged through an emotional roller coaster. Nothing about the man standing before him matched the Deculion he remembered, not even remotely. A faint grin appeared on Rohakan's face. Part of him wondered whether this was nostalgia. Maybe Deculion was letting him escape because of the bond they once shared. The thought didn't survive very long. Deculion crushed it immediately. He made it clear that he felt no affection toward the man responsible for the Empress's death. And if Rohakan truly wished to avoid capture, he should stop talking and start moving. For a moment, Rohakan simply stared. Then he turned around. But as he walked away, his opinion of Deculion had completely changed. After several steps, he stopped once more. His voice grew quieter, more thoughtful. Then he asked a strange question. Did Deculion believe in God? The question came out of nowhere. Even Deculion paused. Then a small smile appeared on his face. The kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. Looking directly at Rohakan, he answered with complete certainty. He only believed in himself. It wasn't the response Rohakan expected, but somehow it felt perfect. In fact, it felt like exactly what Deculion would say, and because of that, the answer satisfied him. The old mage reached into his belongings and tossed a book toward him. It was one of Rohakan's own writings, a record detailing the habits, beliefs, and behavior patterns of various fanatics he had encountered while traveling across the Matli continent. Without another word, Rohakan disappeared into the forest, just like that, gone, leaving Deculion standing alone. A series of system notifications immediately appeared. Quest complete, rewards obtained, yet Deculion barely paid attention. His thoughts lingered elsewhere. Despite his reputation, Rohakan wasn't truly evil. Quite the opposite. He was one of the indispensable figures destined to carry the main quest all the way to its conclusion. One of the pillars supporting the future. Someone who absolutely could not be allowed to die. Just as Deculion prepared to leave the mountain behind, a deafening explosion suddenly shook the forest. His head snapped toward the source. Deep within the dark mountains, a massive sphere of emerald mana erupted into the sky. The thing was enormous, large enough to resemble a mountain itself. There was no mistaking it, that was Rohakan's doing. The purpose became clear immediately, and Deculion knew exactly what came next. The following day, an official report regarding Rohakan's capture attempt was presented before the Emperor. For 3 full days, Imperial Knights and investigators combed every corner of the Dark Mountains. They found nothing. Rohakan had escaped. The Emperor sat upon her throne, looking thoroughly uninterested as the lengthy report continued. Despite its countless pages and details, the conclusion could be summarized in a single sentence. The assassin of the late Empress had once again slipped through the Empire's grasp. Around the circular table, knight commanders lowered their heads and apologized for the failure. But that wasn't the part that caught the Emperor's attention. Another detail stood out. According to the report, Dekulin had engaged Rohakan in a magical battle. When investigators reached the scene, they discovered complete devastation. The battlefield had been torn apart so thoroughly that everyone naturally assumed a fierce clash had occurred. More surprisingly, traces of Rohakan's blood had been recovered. The investigators concluded that the rogue archmage had escaped with serious injuries. Unknowingly, Rohakan had left behind one final gift: publicity. And a lot of it. The news immediately intrigued the Emperor. Within the Empire there were names that stood above all others. Among mages stood Adrian, among knights stood Zeit, and among rogue powers stood Rohakan, the Supreme Three, figures who existed at the very peak of their respective domains. The mere possibility that Dekulin had managed to make one of those monsters bleed was enough to capture the Emperor's full attention, and suddenly, the private lessons she had planned with Dekulin became far more interesting than before.